Morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. On today's programme, pressure growing on the Prime Minister to say sorry.
The dad of murdered trans girl Brianna Ghey told Sky News that comments made by Rishi Sunak were degrading and absolutely dehumanising.
Plus, a US drone strike kills a militia leader in Baghdad. We'll report live from the scene.
It's Thursday, the 8th of February. Downing Street insists the Prime Minister's comments were not transphobic and have invited Brianna Ghey's family to meet him. Also ahead, 3 dead in a US drone strike on a busy street in the Iraqi capital.
And here in Baghdad, there's a furious response to the killing amid calls for immediate retaliation.
So Keir Starmer's biggest U-turn yet. Labour to ditch its £28 billion green investment pledge. The plot to kidnap a child hatched a week before Madeleine McCann disappeared. Prince Harry returns to LAX just 24 hours after a flying visit to see his father. Get ready for an Arctic blast. Forecasters warn of disruption to travel with up to 25 centimetres of snow in some parts of the country.
So won't you make me dizzy from your kisses? Will you take my hand and spin me?
And could this be the year? Ollie Alexander teases his new Eurovision song, Dizzy. Hello, everybody. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News. Brianna Ghey's father has demanded an apology from the Prime Minister after he appeared to make a disparaging remark about transgender people in the House of Commons. Brianna's father described the jibe at PMQs as degrading and absolutely dehumanising. Downing Street insists it was legitimate criticism of Keir Starmer and have invited the family of the murdered teenager to meet Mr Sunak. Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, has the latest.
The brutal murder of trans teenager Brianna Ghey shocked the nation. Her mother, Esther, came to Parliament,
Prime Minister,
where Rishi Sunak made this jibe about Keir Starmer changing his mind.
tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn. Keir Starmer.
The Labour leader stunned.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame.
Gasps from MPs and immediately calls for the Prime Minister to apologise. He didn't, but said this to Brianna's mother.
To demonstrate the compassion and empathy that she did last weekend, I thought demonstrated the very best of humanity in the face of seeing the very worst of humanity, and she deserves all our admiration and praise for that.
Esther Ghey looked shaken as she left the session. Number 10 officials afterwards insisted it was not a transphobic remark and the Prime Minister was making a political point about Keir Starmer changing his position on gender issues. Raw politics, but perhaps without thinking of who was listening. Brianna's dad told Sky News, as the Prime Minister for our country, to come out with degrading comments like he did, regardless of them being in relation to discussions in Parliament, they are absolutely dehumanising. Identities of people should not be used in that manner, and I personally feel shocked by his comments and feel he should apologise for his remarks. By the evening, the Prime Minister had invited Brianna's parents to a meeting about online safety. It's not clear when it will happen. Ridiculing each other's records is part of the political knockabout in an election year, but it's heard far beyond this chamber. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
Coming up, we'll be speaking to the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, about that story, so do stay tuned for more on that. Before that, though, to Baghdad, where a US drone strike has killed 3 members of an Iran-backed militia. Let's get more, should we? Alex Crawford is standing by for us this morning. Hi, Alex. Good morning to you. Tell us more.
Morning, Kay. Yes, there's going to be an interesting development later today with the funeral of this high-ranking commander of Kata'ib Hezbollah. Kata'ib Hezbollah is one of the armed, very powerful, Iran-backed fighting groups in Iraq, and the death of him, the killing of him on a busy civilian street in eastern Baghdad is likely to provoke even more anger today. We went to the scene last night, and in the early hours of the morning, the car that he was traveling in with another member of Kata'ib Hezbollah and a third person we think was the driver. There was a huge crowd there chanting anti-American, anti-foreigner slogans. This is likely to raise the temperature massively. There's a lot of anger about the stationing of US troops in Iraq anyway, and calls immediately from a number of the Iran armed groups, the proxies across the whole region, from not just Iraq, but Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Bahrain. I spoke to the Iraqi security people this morning. Major General Tasneem Al-Kafaji said, "This new aggression undermines all understanding. We hold the American side and coalition forces responsible for the repercussions of these dangerous acts which threaten the security of Iraq and the region." There are expected to be hundreds, possibly thousands of people who turn out for the funerals of this high-ranking commander. Already the Iraqi Prime Minister and President had said that this threatened Iraq's sovereignty, and there's likely to be more calls condemning that today.
OK, Alex, for now, thanks very much indeed. Harry's gone back already to LAX.
Yes, it was a flying visit, to say the least. Lots of focus there on the amount of time he spent in the UK. That's our top story in our brief news bulletin we're going to bring you now, because he has returned to LA after that short 45-minute meeting with his father following his cancer diagnosis. King Charles is at home in Sandringham. Meanwhile, Prince William has spoken publicly about his father's cancer diagnosis, thanking the public for kind messages of support.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also for the kind messages of support for Catherine and for my father, especially in recent days. It means a great deal to us all. It's fair to say the past few weeks have had a rather medical focus, so I thought I'd come to an air ambulance function to get away from it all.
First time global warming breached the internationally agreed upon threshold for an entire year. In 2015, world leaders agreed that global average temperatures should not exceed 1.5 degrees higher than pre-industrial levels. The EU's climate service shows that from February 2023 to January 24, that figure was 1.52 degrees. Taking Viagra could reduce a man's chance of developing Alzheimer's. A study by University College London, which involved more than 260,000 men, found those prescribed with the drug were less likely to develop the disease. Alzheimer's UK says more research is needed to confirm the results. And protesters who try to hide their identity or climb over war memorials could be sent to prison. The government wants to change the law, which would come with a 3-month prison sentence and a £1,000 fine.
Pleased to say the president of Sinn Féin, Lou McDonald, is here with us in the studio now. Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us on the programme. Let's go straight in there. You say United Ireland is now within touching distance. We've heard from Jeffrey Donaldson. He says you must have the longest arms in Ireland. What would you say in response?
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody should be surprised at a unionist advocating a unionist position. I would expect that, and I respect that, by the way. As your viewers will know, there is an outstanding constitutional question on the island of Ireland. We've been partitioned for more than a century now, but politics, life, expectations have changed right across the country. And as per the Good Friday Agreement, which is now 26 years old, there's a provision for border polls to adjudicate whether A, the union with Britain continues, or whether we reunify. And I'm a United Irelander. I firmly and passionately believe that our best opportunities are when we are united economically, socially, politically. And I think recent elections in the north of Ireland and at the weekend, my colleague Michelle O'Neill becoming, for the first time, a Sinn Féin First Minister in the North are just indicators of a profound change that's happening in Ireland. And when I say unity is within touching distance, I said in historic terms, I don't mean that it's happening next week or next month. So you don't have to have those long arms that Jeffrey refers to. But what I am saying and what I firmly believe is in this decade, we will have those referendums, and it's my job and the job of people like me who believe in reunification to convince, to win hearts and minds and to convince people of that opportunity, part of which, Kay, by the way, will be really consolidating our relationship with Britain as our next door neighbour and a good friend.
Yeah. What timescale are we talking about?
I envisage us having the referendums in this decade. So
Before 2030?
Yes, and let me say that is not so far away, so there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. I've said consistently to the government in Dublin that they really need to take possession of this conversation that's now underway right across Ireland. They need to give it a structure and a place, and of course it has to be inclusive. We want to hear from every voice, including those for whom reunification would not be their first option, those who go out and campaign for the union. Nevertheless, we all live together. That's never going to change. We share Ireland, we love Ireland, and we want what's best for our children, for our grandchildren. I think that's the strongest, most powerful common ground that we all share.
So sooner rather than later, because you're somewhat slipping in the polls?
Yeah, I mean, today we haven't had a good poll. There's a lot of polls out and we're up and we're down. I mean, I always listen to them. I prefer when we're having, when we're up in the polls, but the message from the electorate always needs to be heard and heeded. And what this means is that we will work harder. I mean, that doesn't dim my determination in respect of Irish reunification, or indeed in respect of the opportunity for Ireland to have a government of change, a government for the first time without Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, who, as you know, are the two big beasts, traditionally the two big establishment parties. So I think, notwithstanding the poll, it's still very much game on for that. There is a huge amount of work to be done. We have a housing crisis, we have issues in our health service, but we also have huge opportunities in climate, in developing our economy, and I want us to grasp those with both hands.
What's your relationship like with Sir Keir Starmer? Do you think that he would take your calls for a border poll more seriously than a Conservative government?
Well, look, I think irrespective of who is in number 10 Downing Street, the rule book is written. It's the Good Friday Agreement, it's referendums, it's a decision by simple majority, 50% plus one, retains the union or makes the change. So
the reason
I would hope that Keir Starmer and a Labour government, given that the Good Friday Agreement was a Labour Party achievement in the first instance under Tony Blair, I would hope that he would be very true in word and spirit to the Good Friday Agreement.
The reason I say that is because Andrea Leadsom, who is a senior member of the Conservative Party, as you know, the government, therefore, sat where you are right now and said, not exactly quoting her, but she basically said, over her dead body, would it happen?
Yeah. I don't think she quite said that. I think I saw the piece. Well, look, I mean, everyone's entitled to their view, but I would just remind her and others that the agreement is very clear. Irish people, North and South, will make that call without coercion or impediment. And whereas, of course, people here in this country will have a view, in some cases a very passionate view, I think they have to concede that at the end of the day, Irish people, North and South, will make that call. And it shouldn't be such a melodramatic over my dead body, not that the woman said that, type of moment. We need to understand...
Basically what she meant.
Well, quite possibly, but I mean, we live now in a global village. Like, we're all very interdependent, and a thriving, united, prosperous Ireland is good for this part of it, it's good for Europe, and it's good for the world. So I would appeal to Tories who are, unionist in tooth and claw. Fine, that's your view. But just respect our right to make the decision, and just for a moment suspend your disbelief and see the positive outcomes that can come.
You mentioned a global village. You called for the Israeli ambassador to Ireland to be expelled and for Israel to be referred to the International Criminal Court.
Yes.
You stand by that? Obviously.
I absolutely, not alone do I stand by it, I am more convinced now than ever. I made that call some months ago in respect of the ambassador. It is very clear that Netanyahu's government has no interest in international diplomacy, has no regard for our international institutions, up to and including the International Court of Justice. The absolute imperative now is for a ceasefire, a complete and final ceasefire. Every effort needs to be made to attain that. But let me say this, Kay, for far too long, Israel has been allowed to act with impunity. It didn't start in October. This is a generational injustice that the Palestinian people have endured. And I think we are now at a tipping point. And I hope we are now at a point that even if some of the international leadership is still very blind to justice, that all of us, activists, individuals, families, communities, mothers, fathers, say loudly and clearly, this needs to stop. And that means Israel has to be held to account.
OK, final thought before I let you go. Thank you for your fulsome answers, I should say. I want to just ask you quickly about your elder sister, who was born a man, transitioned, I think, in 2021. Given that, how did you feel when you heard what Rishi Sunak said yesterday?
Well, I arrived in yesterday night and I just caught some of the exchange. You know, I think it's disappointing if anybody in leadership uses an issue around a person's identity, their gender identity, their sense of self, to try and score a political point against another. I just think that's very unwelcome, because all of us in the cut and thrust of politics, and it can be adversarial and we have to have fairly thick skins, and we can't be overly precious about ourselves, but you shouldn't incur damage on others, and particularly when those in the trans community are vulnerable and feel very often vulnerable, when our job as people is to embrace everybody, to live and let live, and to allow people their space, their dignity and their respect. And I think it was most unfortunate, given that there was a mother of a young trans woman who had lost their life, whose life was taken so brutally. I think that added to it. But this isn't a question just of bad manners or etiquette. This is a question of fundamentally respecting human beings and knowing your place. And nobody has the right, actually, in my opinion, to stray or to cross lines like that and to cause any kind of stress or harm to people, irrespective of their identity, but particularly vulnerable communities.
Okay.
So that is what I would say at that. And I would imagine that the Prime Minister, if he's thoughtful, would apologise for that or clarify his position. I think that would be very useful.
OK, Lou McDonald, it's great to see you. You can talk more than I can.
That's quite an achievement.
Yeah, it's the Irish roots, I think.
It's the Irish roots, yeah, for sure,
yeah,
for
it's
sure.
nice to see you.
Thank you
so
so much.
indeed.
Lovely
Thanks a
to
lot.
see you.
Let's have a quick look at the papers, should we? And let's start with the Daily Mirror. Shame on you, referring to the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer's criticism of Rishi Sunak's controversial remarks about transgender issues during PMQs yesterday. Shame on you is their headline. The Express suggests that Rishi Sunak may be considering a political comeback for Boris Johnson. I'll ask the Minister about that. Duty calls. The Metro once again leads with the royals as Prince Harry flies back to the US and Prince William returns to his royal duties. And The Guardian leads on an investigation into the Michelle moan, and they also cover that jibe by the Prime Minister and quote Brianna's father, who called the comments dehumanising. Policing Minister Chris Philp is with us. He's got to apologise, hasn't he?
Well, I think the Prime Minister, when asked a question about this later on in PMQs yesterday, paid very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family and the courage they've shown in what have been very difficult circumstances. I think if you listen to the actual clip of what was said earlier in that exchange, the Prime Minister was talking very clearly about Keir Starmer's numerous flip-flops and U-turns on all kinds of different issues. He mentioned pensions, he mentioned peerages, he mentioned public sector pay, a whole range of different things. He mentioned Keir Starmer's flip-flopping on trans issues as one of those, but he was making a point about Keir Starmer's flip-flop. And we've seen that again today with the evaporation of their policy on the green, £28 billion going up in smoke. They've got absolutely no plan. And that is the point the Prime Minister was making. It was about Keir Starmer's flip-flopping and not about anything else.
That's not how it was taken by the family. And Brianna's father has said it was dehumanising and degrading. We've just heard from Lou McDonald there, who her elder sister was born a man. She says that the Prime Minister should apologise. He strayed out of his lane. It was inappropriate, what he said. I've made mistakes and had to apologise. I've wanted to apologise. You've made mistakes and wanted to apologise. Why is it so hard for him to apologise?
Well, he was talking very clearly about Keir Starmer's flip-flops and U-turns. It was very clearly. It was very clearly. And I can see that. I was very, very sad to read those comments yesterday evening. I think Rishi Sunak did later in PMQs go out of his way to pay very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family. He didn't mention, prior to that, he hadn't mentioned them at all. He was talking about Keir Starmer's policies. I think there is a wider point here for politicians, for journalists, for everybody, to keep in mind that when there are very sensitive issues being discussed, to always use respectful and measured language, lest there are unintended consequences. But I think, I've listened to the clip a couple of times, and he was very clearly talking just about Keir Starmer's flip-flops.
But the family is offended.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I was very sad to read those comments. But I've listened to the clip. I think your viewers should listen to the clip as well, or view the clip. I think you may have played it earlier, and it was clear he was talking about Keir Starmer's flip-flops. He mentioned a whole range of different issues.
The family's offended, and they've lost their child.
Yeah.
I mean, saying sorry is not a big deal when someone's lost their child and they're turning to the Prime Minister and saying, you have degraded and dehumanised my child.
Yeah, and he did. And when he was asked about this, when Rishi Sunak was asked about this, he paid very fulsome, as I said already, very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family. And yeah, he was talking about a series of flip-flops.
I know.
And he mentioned Keir Starmer's...
offended.
I've seen that. And he mentioned Keir Starmer's flip-flopping on the trans issues as one of many flip-flops. He didn't even come close to mentioning Brianna himself. It was Keir Starmer that introduced that.
Of course, Brianna was a girl. We know that Brianna's parents have been invited to meet the Prime Minister. When will that happen?
I don't know. I know that the Prime Minister would be very happy to do that, very keen to do that. I know that I think the Digital and Science Secretary wants to meet Brianna's mum to talk about issues to do with social media, which were relevant in this case. And I hope those meetings happen as soon as possible.
What's going on with the search for the Clapham attack suspect?
Well, the Metropolitan Police are using all of the resources that they're available to search for this man who perpetrated this awful attack, including using CCTV evidence. I would just say anyone that has information, please come forward with it and tell the police what you know. We need to find him as soon as possible.
Is the view that he's still alive? Because there's some speculation that he isn't.
Well, I've received no information to suggest that. I don't really want to speculate. It's obviously a live search. And somebody somewhere knows where he is. And I would just say to them, please come forward to the police. OK. Talk to me about your new policing powers. Well, we want to make sure that where protests happen, they are done respectfully. They don't, for example, desecrate war memorials, which is why we're taking action there. We don't want people covering up their faces to make it difficult for the police to identify those committing criminal... Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today.
Oh, dear, there's water.
I'm going to have some of that water.
Yeah, do. I can fill for time.
We want to make sure the police can identify those committing criminal offences at protests. We want to make sure that people's day-to-day lives, don't get disrupted by unreasonable protests. So we're making these changes. We're announcing them today. We're going to make them in the Criminal Justice Bill when it comes back to Parliament in a few weeks' time. The right to protest is an important right, but it shouldn't provide a cover for criminal offences to take place, hence the face-covering measure, and it shouldn't unreasonably disrupt other people's day-to-day lives. OK, what about this story in The Times this morning? I don't know how much you know about it, about an alleged Russian spy, he says, lied to gain asylum and then was working for Russia while they were working at GCHQ. That's a bit alarming. Well, look, we obviously don't comment on live court cases. There are legal proceedings or on national security cases. We have obviously strengthened the law recently with the National Security Act. The security services are constantly monitoring for hostile state activity. There is obviously concern about states like Russia and China actively trying to conduct espionage activities on our soil, and our security services are constantly vigilant. And as I say, we've recently strengthened the law in this area as well. It's a threat that the Western world collectively faces from hostile states, and we need to be doing everything we can to protect ourselves against it as a government, but actually also businesses as well. What's happened to the beard? Well, the beard was very unpopular, I'm afraid. At home or? Yeah, no, at home, particularly with my daughter, and she was very unhappy about it.
Oh, really?
And
I'd rather liked it, I have
Did
to
you?
say, yeah.
Okay. I wasn't so keen on there was a little white spot on the end.
Oh, OK.
But
So
no,
it's gone for good.
I don't know about that. I would certainly not rule out a return, but my daughter wasn't having it. She was very, very adamant.
OK, when's the next election going to be?
Well, I don't know. It's up to the Prime Minister. He said it'll be the second half of this year, so I sort of take that at face value and assume the autumn, but I'm afraid I haven't got any inside information.
Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time. Thank you. Let's just bear in mind what we've just been hearing there about the Prime Minister suggesting that he has offered the opportunity for Brianna's family to go to Downing Street to chat. We were hearing from the Minister that the Prime Minister was in no way planning to cause any offence to the family. And he is... didn't use the word sorry, did he? In fact, I tried several times and he definitely was not, under any circumstances, going to use the word sorry, Murray.
No, absolutely not, Kay. It was interesting. Chris Philp was very, very clear that he was defending the Prime Minister. He said the Prime Minister had done nothing wrong and essentially he was kind of being misrepresented, and actually the point was about flip-flopping and Keir Starmer's lack of clarity on particular policy issues. The difficulty, which is a perfectly understandable, legitimate attack. But this is a question of timing. It's a question of being slightly maybe tone deaf, knowing who's in the room at the time, especially when it's such a horrific case. The murder was so brutal. I mean, Brianna Ghey was stabbed 28 times when she was attacked by those other teenagers. And I think what was really interesting, I don't want to read too much into it, but I do think it was quite interesting and worth noting. Chris Philp did say that there was a wider point to be noted for politicians to remember about the sensitivities of what they say, and journalists about what they say. And I think, although it wasn't obviously a criticism of the Prime Minister, I think that was the closest we might get to some admittance that maybe things could have been done slightly better, slightly more tactfully. I don't know if that's going to go far enough for Brianna Ghey's parents. They are obviously demanding an apology. We still haven't had that yet. Are we going to have that? Or are we going to have this kind of constant, blocking or stalemate? But I think the difficulty, and Chris Philp was clearly uncomfortable there trying to defend this, when he was also trying to be clear that actually he was very saddened by what Brianna Ghey's father had come out with as well, saying how dehumanising he felt the Prime Minister's comments had been. So I think it's going to be so uncomfortable.
Felt his anxiety, actually, and angst.
You could see it. You could see it on his face. And I think that's because I think a lot of politicians probably agree that maybe it really wasn't the right thing to say, but they can't.
If a murdered child's parents say, my child and the memory of my child has been degraded and dehumanised, you get in there and you say, I am really sorry. I am so sorry. I can't believe this has happened. I misspoke. I can only apologise.
I think the safer thing would have been, like you say, to actually say, that's not the point I was making and that's not what I meant, but I totally understand how it came across and I really apologise for making you feel that way. And let's move on and let's talk about this and let's try and make positive change. That, I think, would have been a more constructive way of dealing with it than what we're seeing now.
Yeah, let's see what the day brings, should we? Thanks very much. Thank you. Now, let's move on. And even us Northerners might need our big coats on today. Isn't that right, Greg? You're in North Wales?
Yeah, certainly here they will. There is an amber warning that will take effect here in North Wales at 8 o'clock, so in about half an hour's time. That will last until 3 o'clock. I've got to say, at the minute, it's a bit of a wintry mix. There are certainly some big flakes of snow, but it's very sleety, very rainy. For the people I spoke to this morning, thought they would wake up to a lot more snow than they have. But the issue here, and also over the Pennines and the Peak District later today, is this warm air that's moving up from the south and then hitting the cold air, which is making it very unpredictable where this snow might hit and what kind of strength it might be. But they're ready here, and the expectation it could cause some disruption.
OK, we'll let you get in and get a cup of tea. Thank you. And if you're in Scotland, Kirsty, it's going to snow.
Well, actually, Northern England first and North Wales as well. But yes, there's some snow heading that way. And it's a real mix because we've had the cold airs come down from the north, milder airs come up from the south, and where the two have met is where we're most likely to see the snow. But today, London and the south looking really wet. But as we work our way further north, it'll turn more to sleet and snow, especially over the hills. Now, we have got a few weather warnings out in force already today. So you can see the rain in the south. But to the north of that, you'll notice some interestingly shaped amber areas with a little dinosaur footprint and a little tiny
I
UK.
see that, yeah.
Yeah, and that's showing you where we've got the greatest risk of seeing some potential snow today. So it's going to mostly be over the higher ground of North Wales, the Pennines, the Peak District as well. So that's where we're going to see some quite significant snow, and with an
That's exactly where Greg is.
Yeah, it's coming for him, it's coming. That rain turned into snow, and with the easterly wind, it'll blow some of the snow around as well. So really quite grim. And then as the week goes on, we'll see the snow risk, as you mentioned, moving into Scotland. So they're more at threat of it through tomorrow. Northern Ireland as well, also seeing some rain, sleet and snow most over high ground. You can see that's the colder air and the warm air, the bit of the battleground in between those, and with the low pressure coming in today. So keeping an eye on the rain, sleet and snow moving northwards today for all of us, feeling rather more wintry. Freezing rain certainly to watch out for on the roads.
Goodness me. Let's have a look at that in more detail. Thanks, Kirsty.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So rain spreading from the southwest will turn increasingly to sleet and snow over central parts today. The Met Office have amber warnings for snow over central Britain, while yellow warnings for snow, ice and rain apply to much of the UK and Ireland. Northern parts are fine if frosty now, while the south is wet and windy.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up, we are going to be hearing from an experimental oncologist about the gamble he took on a new cancer treatment to save himself. Elections in Pakistan get off to a violent start. We'll have the latest live from Islamabad. And our security and defence editor gets an extremely rare look behind the doors of one of NATO's most secretive spy bases. She'll be here to tell us more. again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we'll hear what goes on behind the doors of one of NATO's most secretive spy bases. Oh, I know, right?
Kind of James Bond-esque. I like it.
Yeah, we like it. More on that with Deborah. Before that, though.
Let's bring you the morning's top stories, shall we? The father of the murdered trans teenager, Brianna Ghey, has demanded an apology from the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak aimed a political jibe at Sir Keir Starmer, saying he'd broken promises on defining a woman. On this programme, the policing minister insisted that Mr Sunak was talking about Keir Starmer's flip-flops and U-turns. US officials claim 3 members of the Kata'ib Hezbollah militia have been killed in a drone strike, including a high-ranking commander. The drone strike hit a car in the Iraqi capital. Sky News understands that Labour is ditching its policy of spending £28 billion a year on its green investment. That's despite one of his ministers telling this programme just yesterday that the plan was definitely going ahead. And a British expat has told Sky News that a plot to kidnap a child was being hatched in the Portuguese holiday resort of Praia da Luz a week before Madeleine McCann went missing.
Now, a British expat has told Sky News that a plot to kidnap a child was being hatched in the Portuguese holiday resort of Praia da Luz a week before Madeleine McCann went missing. Hi, morning, tell us more.
Morning. It's an intriguing story from this man who was living within that bohemian off-grid community 17 years ago. An intriguing story that he says emerged in an emotional late-night fireside chat in the woods, and a story that involved an alleged plot to steal a child. A week after this man learned of the plot, Madeleine McCann vanished. This is the story.
The teepee was around in here somewhere.
We're in a remote part of the Algarve, 20 miles from Praia da Luz. It's 17 years since Ken Ralphs visited the hidden tent where his friend lived.
It's private property now, it's owned by somebody.
It was the night his friend, who can't be named for legal reasons, told him about a plot to abduct a child.
We had a few beers, and then obviously during the early hours of the morning, started to cry. Well, then he confessed to me he was getting involved with Christian to take a child from Praia da Luz from a rich family.
The Christian they were talking about, he said, was a German drifter and a man they both knew in the nomadic community. Christian B, as he's known, is the main suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, but he's not been charged over it.
I said, it's ridiculous, don't do this. What are you getting involved with people like this for? You can't kidnap a child and ask for a ransom, you'll end up going to jail. He said, it's not about a ransom, it's about selling the child to a German couple who couldn't have children.
A week later, Madeleine vanished. Mr Ralphs was on a trip to England when he heard the news.
Some more breaking news for you this morning. We're just hearing that a search is underway for a 3-year-old British girl who's gone missing in the Algarve area of Portugal.
Mr Ralphs says he contacted police in Cumbria.
They just said, to the police, look, you need to... Here's the secret map of how you get to this point here. And I said, that must be sent immediately to Portugal.
Mr Ralphs put his evidence into a detailed statement and on his return to Portugal spoke to local police.
They said, have you made your statement to the police? I said, yeah. They said, well, don't worry, go home. If they need to contact you, they will. And of course, for endless years, nobody did contact me.
When Christian B was revealed as a suspect 4 years ago, Mr Ralphs contacted police again.
You told the UK police in 2007. You told them again in 2020.
Yeah, I've sent my statement to the German prosecution.
And then what happened?
And then they've just sent it straight back to Scotland Yard.
So what's happened to...
They found him.
And did he back up your story?
Well, he said he doesn't know us. I have 12 independent witnesses that can prove he's lying.
It's difficult to know where Ken Ralph's evidence fits into the Madeleine McCann case. He certainly had several exchanges with Scotland Yard investigators, and the idea that there was a plan to steal a child is backed up by a friend of the suspect. Mikhail Tucher, once a close pal of Christian B, has said he talked about selling children to make money.
And Scotland Yard detectives have always believed that whatever her ultimate fate, Madeleine was abducted in a carefully planned operation.
Such a trigger still, isn't it, with the pictures of that little girl?
Yes, and can't believe it's 17 years ago. Now, Christian B., who's the suspect in the Madeleine case, hasn't been charged, and he absolutely denies any involvement, but he is on trial next week in Germany for unrelated sex allegations. We're going to hear an awful lot more about him in the coming weeks.
I think that's true. For now, thanks very much, Martin. Thank you. Now, Sky News has been given rare access to a top-secret military spy base in Cambridgeshire, where defence officials warn that conflict is likelier now than at any point in recent history. Let's get more, should we? Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, was there. She's with us. Hi, morning. Good to see you. Tell me more.
So, yes, we had this very rare access to this facility. It's called RAF Whitton in Cambridgeshire, where there is a building called the Pathfinder Building, and inside there is this, it's kind of the size of a large indoor football pitch. This enormous hall where you have many analysts working around the clock with feeds, sort of images from all around the world coming in, being processed. And it's part of Defence Intelligence, which is a branch of the intelligence community that you'll know from the war in Ukraine, those tweets that come out from Defence Intelligence regularly giving updates. And they were very instrumental in terms of that forecasting that Russia was going to launch its full-scale invasion. And yet it's incredibly rare to get access to see their work. And like you said, officials that we spoke to, defence officials, saying that we really are living in dangerous times, pointing to the war in Ukraine, obviously the Iran-linked tensions in the Middle East, the war in Gaza, and as well the growing threat, the challenge posed by China. And they also talked about the increasingly lethal weapons that are being developed by rivals, such as China, like these hypersonic missiles, super fast ballistic missiles that are basically impossible to stop once they've been launched. And one official saying how dangerous they are and sort of signalling really that the way to deal with that, given that our missile defence system is pretty sketchy, would be to take these things out from their launch sites, but really giving an insight into the kind of things people are thinking about, the warnings that they're giving to government and what we should all be aware of.
OK, for now, thanks very much. Thank you. Prince William has spoken publicly about his father's cancer diagnosis for the first time since the announcement by Buckingham Palace. His brother Harry has arrived back in Los Angeles. Ivor Bennett has been looking at events for us, and he is with us now. So we saw Harry at LAX 24 hours after he took off.
Yeah, maybe even less than 24 hours. I mean, it was a very fleeting visit, wasn't it? Travelling all this way just for a 45-minute meeting and staying just one night in London. I think that reinforces what we were saying yesterday about how, well, the magnitude of this news for the family, how these are difficult times. This has come as a shock, as it would have done for any family receiving this kind of news, I think. But publicly, it's a very different story, as we saw last night with Prince William making his first appearance yesterday, following the news of the King's diagnosis. He was giving a speech to a charity fundraising dinner. I think it would have been strange if he hadn't referenced the diagnosis, but he not only referenced it in his speech, he thanked people for their support and also even cracked a little joke. Let's have a listen.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also for the kind messages of support for Catherine and for my father, especially in recent days. It means a great deal to us all. It's fair to say the past few weeks have had a rather medical focus, so I thought I'd come to an air ambulance function to get away from it all.
Just looking in the papers this morning, it says that Harry took it upon himself to fly all the way to London, and it left the King kicking his heels. He stayed in a hotel in London last night, night before, then he went home again.
So he stayed so he didn't even get a warning that Harry was coming?
Well, apparently Harry took it upon himself. That's
right,
what we're being told by insiders.
Interesting. So perhaps the family feud's not necessarily being put aside? Or...
Yeah, well, they only chatted for about half an hour, didn't they? And then Harry left and they got on a helicopter. Why didn't you get in the helicopter with him?
I know, it does potentially say a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was chatting to Laura, our royal correspondent, about it yesterday, and she said, oh, it's not out of the ordinary at all. Would be in our house.
Same here.
There we go. It's good to see you. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you. We'll hear from an experimental oncologist about the gamble he took on a new cancer treatment to save himself.
Well, I've always wanted to do pantomime. Ever since I was about 6, 7 years old, I wanted to be an actor. And my first experience of live theatre, like with a lot of children, was pantomime. But there was just no workshops, there was no training, there was no worthwhile developmental chances or opportunities. So as soon as I read about the Masters and Panto in the stage, I had to do it. Not a lot of people get it. Not a lot of people understand. People think I'm joking when I tell them. But I think pantomime is a quintessentially British tradition. Everyone in Britain recognises it. It's the lifeblood of our nation and one of the best things to come out of our country. So when you tell international audiences what panto is, they're not quite sure exactly because it is such a British thing. I think people are being more cautious in terms of representation and inclusivity. If I'll try that again, and inclusivity. I think there's a lot more stories to tell. I mean, with panto, you can tell different points of view of stories. It can go anywhere. That's what's so great about panto is it can be molded and adapted and explored in very many different ways. So the first module looked at the historical background of panto, how it developed from the Victorian age and how it took its influences from clowning. And then the second module looked at actual pantomime techniques. So we took routines such as the ghost gag. When you have the actors on stage, you have the ghost creeping in behind the actors on the stage and all the kids saying, it's behind you. We actually looked at the mechanics of that stock routine and what it takes to execute that, to the point where you're getting the laughs. And then the third module, as you see from the clips, we got to direct, produce and write our own panto, and we took that to local communities around Staffordshire, and we got to invite producers to come along and watch.
Hello again, everybody watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Let's bring in Wilfred, should we? Hi, Wilf. I'm guessing that you're going to be talking about this flip-flop, some might say, by the Leader of the Opposition today.
I think we certainly are. So we are expecting, as you said, Kay, to hear the Labour Party drop that outright pledge to spend £28 billion a year on their green investment plan. You say it's a flip-flop. I mean, it's perhaps the most drawn-out delay to a dropping of a core principle that we've seen. And, of course, they've taken quite a few hits for it. I think they'll take a lot of hits again, at least in the short term, on lacking those principles. The question I have from here is, does it also mean they drop the policy pledge that led to that £28 billion figure? I spoke to Keir Starmer earlier in the year, and he says what matters is clean power by 2030, keeping those targets. I'm not prepared to move that date. So will they keep that part of the pledge, or will they drop that also? And I think that will lead to the extent to which we are questioning if this is a real abandoning of a core principle or not.
Yeah, I mean, how will they achieve that without the green investment that the £28 billion a year would bring? Interestingly, I had a representative from Labour, Sir Chris Bryant, on the show yesterday, and as late as yesterday morning, he was adamant that this was not going to be dropped.
Oh, are we playing the soundbite? Sorry, I thought the soundbite was coming.
I did too, but never mind.
Well, I watched that yesterday and I completely agree. And this is to the point about if they've been planning to U-turn on this, it seems all of a sudden, given that comment. Do you know, even Sir Keir Starmer was talking to Times Radio earlier in the week, and he said on Monday, we're going to need investment. That's where the £28 billion comes in. It's investment that's definitely needed for a mission that I'm unwavering on, clean power by 2030. So as recently as a couple of days ago, Starmer himself was still pledging this, let alone a backbench MP. Interestingly, Kay, it comes on a week where the Prime Minister is having his political nous questioned, given two crass comments, one in an interview with Piers Morgan, one in PMQs yesterday. And the annoying thing for the Prime Minister and Conservatives is this broader hold the Labour Party to account for this green investment pledge is probably one of their best executed political ploys in recent months. And again, the gloss of that for the Tories is perhaps taken off a little bit because of some of these crass comments the Prime Minister's made.
OK, for now, thanks very much, Wilfred. We'll see you from 10 o'clock, of course. Thank you. Now, when an Australian doctor was diagnosed with the worst of the worst brain tumour, rather than accept his fate, he set out to do the impossible to find a cure. Together with his research partner, Professor Richard Scolyer, work has led to groundbreaking developments in cancer treatment and has been credited with saving the lives of thousands. Let's speak now to Professors Georgia Long and Richard Scolyer, co-medical directors at the Australia Melanoma Institute, and this year's Australians of the Year. It's good to see both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. To you first, Richard, tell me about your diagnosis, how it came about.
I was actually in Poland lecturing at a conference there. The next day, climbed a mountain and had a seizure, and then that's when it had some scans which showed I had a mass in my brain, which turned out to be this glioblastoma, nasty type of brain cancer. And thankfully, Georgina was on board at the time.
OK. What was your reaction when you had the diagnosis? Because, of course, I'm guessing that you are very used to giving that diagnosis to others.
Well, I'm a pathologist. Georgina's a medical oncologist, so she's used to giving that diagnosis. But, yeah, I was devastated. I know what cancer means, having dedicated my life to the diagnosis and treatment of cancer, to be diagnosed with brain cancer, the worst subtype, which basically is incurable cancer. Treatment hasn't changed in almost 20 years, didn't sit right with me.
So how did that call go for you then, Georgia?
So Richard called me from Poland. In fact, his wife called me from Poland, and being a clinician and a researcher and running a lot of clinical trials with immunotherapy, and that's really my area of expertise in melanoma. After the grief, which is still ongoing, really, it's a very grim diagnosis. I set about thinking, what could we do, knowing that glioblastoma, the treatment had not changed in 20 years, being a medical oncologist. So I started thinking about how we could apply what we know in melanoma and what we've forged and discovered in melanoma about treating with immunotherapy before surgery. It actually makes the immunotherapy more effective, like a sniffer dog sniffing out drugs. If you are trained to know the drugs, when you go to the airport, you can sniff them out better. We know in melanoma that by giving the immunotherapy first before surgery, we actually get a much more sustained and effective, durable anti-cancer control from the patient's own immune system. So that was the first step. And then coming up with the novel combination, which has never been used across the world, except in early melanoma trials. And so this is what I set about with our team from our lab. Then the most important bit was what we did with that research tissue. So planning and strategizing with Richard about resecting the tissue with our surgeon and making sure that we did all the right experiments in our lab to prove we actually activated the immune system. the drugs, the immune activators got into the tumour inside his brain, and we could see an increase in all these immune cells within his tumour. So we were really pleased with those early results. Glioblastoma is considered not very sensitive to immunotherapy, and we've shown that, in fact, that may not be true. It's early days yet. We're 8 months down the track. But we've shown that, indeed, you can activate the immune system and do it very well. And this is now a foundational first step to change the field and the way drugs are explored in brain cancer.
And Richard, how are you feeling?
Not too bad, considering, I guess, the risk of major adverse reactions to these sorts of drugs is fairly high. But I've had plain sailing so far, so couldn't be happier and hope it stays like that for some time longer. My brain tumour hasn't come back, more importantly, so we're now up to 8 months. The average time to recurrence for this subtype of brain cancer is 6 months. So far, so good. And let's, from my perspective, hope it keeps going like this.
OK. Thanks for staying up for us to join us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News. Good luck. Do keep in touch and let us know how the treatment is going. Fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. And one other thing, just in the UK, melanoma is actually our day-to-day bread and butter, and prevention is better than cure. And I know in the UK, the rate of melanoma is increasing. We know this. So it's really important that the UK population understand that risk. And we're working on stop glamorization of tanning, because tanning is your skin cells in trauma, and that increases your risk of skin cancer and the deadliest form, melanoma.
OK, we are out of time, so we're literally out of time, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Slip, slap, slop, I think they say in Australia. We'll see you in a sec. Morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, pressure grows on the Prime Minister to say sorry.
The dad of murdered trans girl Brianna Ghey told Sky News that comments made by Rishi Sunak were degrading and absolutely dehumanising.
Plus, a US drone strike kills a militia leader in Baghdad. We'll report from the scene.
It's Thursday, the 8th of February. Downing Street insists the Prime Minister's comments were not transphobic. The policing minister tells me we should all be careful with our language.
I think there is a wider point here for politicians, for journalists, for everybody, to keep in mind that when there are very sensitive issues being discussed, to always use respectful and measured language.
Also had 3 dead in a US drone strike on a busy street in the Iraqi capital.
And here in Baghdad, there's a furious response to the killing amid calls for immediate retaliation.
Sir Keir Starmer's biggest U-turn yet. Labour ditches its £28 billion green investment pledge, we're told. The plot to kidnap a child hatched a week before Madeleine McCann disappeared. Prince Harry returns to Los Angeles just 24 hours after a flying visit to see his father. Get ready for an Arctic blast. Forecasters warn of disruption to travel with up to 25 centimetres of snow in some parts of the country.
I guess I'm going down, 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 and I feel I'm going to drown.
We'll bring you the story of the most influential band you may never have heard of. Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News. Brianna Ghey's father has demanded an apology from the Prime Minister after he appeared to make a disparaging remark about transgender people in the House of Commons. Brianna's father described the jibe at PMQs as degrading and absolutely dehumanising. Speaking for the government this morning, Chris Philp told us a few moments ago the comments were not transphobic. It was legitimate criticism of Sir Keir Starmer. Why is it so hard for him to apologise?
Well, he was talking very clearly about Keir Starmer's flip-flops and U-turns. It was very clearly. It was very clearly. And I can see that. I was very, very sad to read those comments yesterday evening. I think Rishi Sunak did later in PMQs go out of his way to pay very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family. He didn't mention prior to that. He hadn't mentioned them at all. He was talking about Keir Starmer's policies. I think there is a wider point here for politicians, for journalists, for everybody, to keep in mind that when there are very sensitive issues being discussed, to always use respectful and measured language, lest there are unintended consequences. But I think, I've listened to the clip a couple of times, and he was very clearly talking just about Keir Starmer's flip-flops.
But the family is offended.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I was very sad to read those comments. But I've listened to the clip. I think your viewers should listen to the clip as well, or view the clip. I think you may have played it earlier, and it was clear he was talking about Keir Starmer's flip-flops, and he mentioned a whole range of different issues.
The family's offended, and they've lost their child.
Yeah.
I mean, saying sorry is not a big deal when someone's lost their child and they're turning to the Prime Minister and saying, you have degraded and dehumanised my child.
Yeah, and he did. And when he was asked about this, when Rishi Sunak was asked about this, he paid very fulsome, as I said already, very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family.
Murray's here. He's going to have to say sorry eventually, surely.
It does feel like that, Kay. It's hard to know how long this stance is going to last when we've got minister after minister coming on Sky News last night, this morning, saying that it wasn't about trans rights, it wasn't about the trans community, it was about Keir Starmer's flip-flopping and inability to stick to one policy position, which is a legitimate criticism of a politician, but it's all about timing. These things are always about timing. So Brianna Ghey's mother being in the chamber when Rishi Sunak made that comment about Keir Starmer not knowing what a woman is, it just comes across really, really tone deaf. And it doesn't help when it's the second gaffe we've had this week from the Prime Minister. So we've had 2 gaffes in 1 week that both come across like the Prime Minister's not really reading the room when it comes to how he's talking, what he's saying, and in what context. So, for instance, the £1,000 bet on the Rwanda policy, that was another gaffe we had earlier this week. And again, that's during a cost of living crisis on the day you're giving people 300 quid to try and essentially allow them to keep their homes warm.
Mary Lou McDonald, her elder sister is trans. She was on the show this morning. This is what she thought.
You know, I think it's disappointing if anybody in leadership uses an issue around a person's identity, their gender identity, their sense of self, to try and score a political point against another. I just think that's very unwelcome. I would imagine that the Prime Minister, if he's thoughtful, would apologise for that or clarify his position. I think that would be very useful.
Pressure's mounting.
It's really, really difficult, isn't it, Kay, for Rishi Sunak at the moment? I mean, Mary Lou McDonald's comments there were obviously quite heartfelt. It's a personal issue for her, but also she was trying to essentially say that there needs to still be a line, even with the cut and thrust of politics. And we know that, especially at PMQs, at this dispatch box, things can get heated, things can get quite savage sometimes, but nonetheless, I think Mary Lou McDonald was trying to point out that there has to be a line, especially when you're dealing with vulnerable communities like the trans community, which we know are statistically more likely to suffer certain things like homelessness, certain things like violence and other difficult life events as well. So I think that's what Mary Lou McDonald was trying to explain. Now, I think it'll be interesting to see how long the line lasts with the government on not apologising. We know that Brianna Ghey's father has explicitly told Sky News he wants an apology. He says it was dehumanising. He said it was completely unacceptable. And I think we know that the Prime Minister's invited Brianna Ghey's parents to a meeting with himself to talk about online safety for teenagers. We don't know if that invitation's been accepted yet. But nonetheless, I think that's going to be a really awkward exchange between the parents and Rishi Sunak if Rishi Sunak does not apologise. And then they meet face to face and they have to look, and Rishi Sunak has to look those parents in the eye, knowing that they want an apology.
Exactly. Let's see what happens. Just have a quick look at these pictures, guys, while I've got both of you together. They're from Iceland. Whoa, another, I know, Mari.
Wow.
It's another volcano eruption. We've seen one, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and is this the same one?
Yeah, this is near the town of Grindavik, and the Norwegian Meteorological Agency said that a 3-kilometre long crack, you can see part of it there, was spotted on Thursday north of Grindavik, and just that fissure of magma rising up there, remarkable. And obviously we'd seen buildings set ablaze, hadn't we, a couple of weeks ago in that fishing town.
People who lived there actually were saying that they were not going to return and it was over, they were done. Just to tell you geographically, it's, if you know Iceland at all, it's quite near the Blue Lagoon. Have you ever been?
No, never been.
Okay, so beautiful parts, beautiful country. If you've never been, you should go. But this is where that tourism, I was almost going to say hotspot, but I'm not going to say that.
Gosh.
No, and also fairly close to the capital as well. And it's,
yeah,
if you've been to Iceland, you drive around, there's kind of steam and vents everywhere. It's a remarkable part of the world.
Yeah, more on that coming up with Ivor in just a moment or two. Before that, though, what's happening with Harry?
Yes, well, Prince Harry has returned to Los Angeles after a brief visit to the UK and a 45-minute meeting with his father following his cancer diagnosis. After the meeting, King Charles appeared in public for the first time since that diagnosis was made public, returning to Sandringham. Meanwhile, Prince William has spoken about his father's cancer diagnosis, thanking the public for the kind messages of support.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also for the kind messages of support for Catherine and for my father, especially in recent days. It means a great deal to us all. It's fair to say the past few weeks have had a rather medical focus, so I thought I'd come to an air ambulance function to get away from it all.
For the first time, global warming breached the internationally agreed upon threshold for an entire year. In 2015, world leaders agreed that global average temperatures should not exceed 1.5 degrees higher than pre-industrial levels. But the EU's climate service shows that from February 23 to January 2024, that figure was 1.52 degrees. Taking Viagra could reduce a man's chance of developing Alzheimer's. A study by University College London, which involved more than 260,000 men, found those prescribed with the drug were less likely to develop the disease. Alzheimer's UK says more research, though, is needed to confirm the results. Sky News understands that Labour is to ditch its £28 billion green investment pledge. It follows months of speculation, but the frontbencher Chris Bryant insisted on this programme just yesterday that the policy would stay.
Talk to me about your £28 billion green pledge. Where are we with that? What on earth is happening?
We are doing it.
When?
We're doing it in the next Parliament.
OK, towards the end of the next Parliament?
I can't tell you a precise day of the week and what month it's going to be, but our determination, our plan, our intent is to get it done.
It's a swift
24 hours
turnabout.
is a long time in politics, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Oh, my goodness.
And you know, there is so much need for green investment as well. We've heard so often, we talked there just about that figure of 1.52 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. The need is there, but all of a sudden the money's gone.
Well, let's see what happens. It's not, you know, that's Sky News understanding what's going on. It'd be interesting to see how Zakir sells that. Much more pressing issues in Iceland for people there this morning.
Yes, the volcano there that we were reporting on in the last few weeks, that has erupted again for the third time in recent weeks. These are live images lighting up the sky there, as you can see. And so not a traditional, what one might think of a traditional volcanic eruption, more kind of fountains of lava spewing out of the ground, spewing out of the fissures that have opened up there in the last couple of months. This is on the southwest of the country, on a peninsula not far from the capital, Reykjavik, actually around 30 miles away, close to the Blue Lagoon tourist spot, close to the airport. Those are unaffected, but the village, Grindavik, in that region is very close to this eruption. The 4,000 residents there, they had already actually been evacuated from this area. It's not immediately clear if this latest eruption will threaten the village, because the authorities there have actually dug some ditches and dug some dikes to try and divert the lava away from the village. But previously, some homes were actually set alight on the eruption in January. So this time it might well be, who knows, we don't know yet, it might well be threatened again, though.
Yeah, in fact, we saw some of those buildings, didn't we, in flames. But I think I'm right in saying, Iv, you'll correct me, that there hasn't been any loss of life that we know of. No,
not that we know of. I mean, Iceland is well versed in kind of seismic activity, being situated on the bridge between two plates, of course. I'm just reading here that it boasts more than 30 active volcanoes, and this is the 6th outbreak on this particular peninsula since 2021. So they've been monitoring it closely. The seismic activity started in October, so they knew that these eruptions were going to happen at some point, so they took precautions. They're well versed in kind of preparing for these events. Excuse me, so evacuated people before it happened.
OK. Keeping you on your toes this morning, aren't we? Royals 1 hour, Iceland the next.
That's what it's all about, breaking news.
Yeah, who knows what the next hour might bring. Stay tuned and find out. Thanks very much indeed, Ivor. Thank you. Let's take you to Baghdad now, where a US drone strike has killed 3 members of an Iranian-backed militia. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford has this update from Baghdad.
Kata'ib Hezbollah is one of the armed, very powerful Iran-backed fighting groups in Iraq, and the death of him, the killing of him on a busy civilian street in eastern Baghdad is likely to provoke even more anger today. We went to the scene last night, and in the early hours of the morning, the car that he was travelling in with another member of Kata'ib Hezbollah and a third person we think was the driver. There was a huge crowd there chanting anti-American, anti-foreigner slogans. This is likely to raise the temperature massively. There's a lot of anger about the stationing of US troops in Iraq anyway, and calls immediately from a number of the Iran armed groups, the proxies across the whole region, from not just Iraq, but Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Bahrain. I spoke to the Iraqi security people this morning. Major General Tasneem Al-Kafaji said this new aggression undermines all understanding. We hold the American side and coalition forces responsible for the repercussions of these dangerous acts which threaten the security of Iraq and the region. There are expected to be hundreds, possibly thousands of people who turn out for the funerals of this high-ranking commander. Already the Iraqi Prime Minister and President had said that this threatened Iraq's sovereignty, and there's likely to be more calls condemning that today.
Let's talk in more detail about what is happening with Israel and Hamas. As you can see, Lord Dannett is here with us, former Chief of the General Staff. Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Okay. There had been some hopes of a potential ceasefire, giving the opportunity to get hostages out and Palestinian prisoners back to Gaza. It looks as though that may have drifted away a little.
It's drifted away a little insofar as it's not imminent. I think the conditions that Hamas tried to impose, frankly, are just too stringent and too much for the Israelis to accept. I think the problem is the Israelis, Netanyahu, is still caught between two twin objectives. One is he wants to destroy Hamas. He's vowed to destroy Hamas, but he's got to get as many of the hostages back as he possibly can. And I think, sadly, reports are that as many as 30 or so of them have already been killed. So the window is closing and the pressure is mounting on him. But I think Antony Blinken has done what Joe Biden would have wanted him to do, to try everything possible to try and get a ceasefire agreement, because Biden's losing support in the States as a result of the continuing bloodshed in Gaza.
Yeah, there's about 100 hostages, though, still being held, I believe, by Hamas. They envisioned 3 phases lasting 45 days each, with the hope that it would result in a longer-lasting ceasefire. What do you think it was that stuck in the craw of Netanyahu?
Well, I think probably the end game there, which at the end of that 135-day period would have had Israeli Defence Forces out of Gaza. I don't think he wants to commit to that at the present moment, because after all, their vowed intention to destroy Hamas, from their point of view, must be seen through. And I think to have an end date when you're going to know you're going to withdraw gives them hope to hang on. I think that was probably the sticking point.
To that end, it looks as though the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, is moving into Rafah.
Yes, so the reports are saying. But again, I think this is almost inevitable. They have got to follow this thing through. And Hamas leadership and remaining Hamas fighters will be continuing to hide amongst the people. And there are a better part of 1 million people now who have moved down to Rafah. So it's providing the perfect camouflage, if you like, for Hamas to hide in. So the Israelis have really got no option but to follow the people. But again, of course, the pressure is going to come on them to minimise civilian casualties. And it's the use of airstrikes that's probably the most damaging, because they are more indiscriminate. They can't be as precise. They can't be as precise as we saw in Baghdad overnight with the Americans taking out that Iranian militia leader. That was very clinical, very surgical.
Yeah. What might happen next?
Well, I think as far as that attack on the base in Jordan was concerned, the Americans said that they would retaliate, and I think they've done, to my mind, the right thing by searching through their intelligence as closely as they can, picking out a leader and taking that leader out, which is exactly what happened in Baghdad. They obviously knew where he was, what he'd be travelling in, and they, to use the awful expression, took him out.
What do you make of Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin? Obviously, we don't know the content of it yet, but it's fascinating that an American would go over and interview President Putin ahead of the next election.
Yes, it's also fascinating that he says that he's gone because nobody else has gone and nobody else has tried to get an interview.
I'll interview him.
Well, I was going to say, I think Steve Rosenberg of the BBC has tried almost daily to interview him. And Putin himself had a 4-hour press conference not that long ago, which included taking questions from foreign journalists. So I think Carl Tyson is sort of getting a little bit ahead of himself there. But if he gets an interview, fine, and let's see what questions he asks.
How could it impact on the international outlook of what's going on in Russia at the moment, I wonder?
Well, it might have the effect of, if it draws Putin out to an extent, some of that footage might find its way back into the Russian domestic audience, because I think this is one of the biggest concerns, that the Kremlin has such a tight control over the state media, over all media really in Russia, that the average Russian person doesn't really know what goes on and is fed the line that this is a war against the West, that Russia has a sort of God-given duty to win.
My President Putin's story is that he once liked one of my posts on Instagram.
Well, aren't you lucky?
I don't know if I am or not, but he did. It was the...
Well, how much time of the day do you think he spends looking at that kind of stuff?
Indeed. Well, it was the throne for the coronation.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, some aspire to greatness, others have it thrust on.
It's good to see you as always. Thank
You
you
too.
very much indeed, my lord. Thank you. Let's talk now about the future of Ireland, north and south. A little earlier, Sinn Féin President Mary Lou McDonald predicted that a referendum on unity would happen before 2030. What timescale are we talking about?
I envisage us having the referendums in this decade. So
before 2030?
Yes, and let me say that is not so far away, so there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done.
I was going to let you go, but you reacted with an ah when I said that.
Well, I think there is a narrative that sees a unified Ireland as being inevitable, and I don't think we should accept that. There is a great body of people in Northern Ireland who are fiercely loyal to this country, and I think we in England, Scotland and Wales have a duty to stand by them and support them. Because let's face it, I mean, when I was a young man fighting in Belfast against the IRA in the 70s, they were fighting to unify Ireland. Well, it's moved on now that Sinn Féin leads the government in the Assembly, but that shouldn't be allowed to become an inevitability that the island of Ireland is united. There's a large number of people who want to be part of this country, and we have an absolute duty to protect them.
OK, it's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed, my lord. Thank you. Let's take... Apparently the weather's going to be shocking over the next few days. Snow, 25 centimetres of it in places. Let's bring in Greg, should we, who is in Wrexham, I think, this morning. Hi, Greg, what's it like there?
Well, it's certainly wintry. The amber warning has come into place for here in North Wales at 8 o'clock. And although there isn't the snow that I think they expected to wake up to here, there's a lot of sleet, a lot of rain, and over the next few hours there could well be, where we are on pretty high ground, a decent amount of snow. Later today, from midday, that warning switches to the Peak District and the South Pennines, so those areas could see a similar amount of sleet and snow. Yesterday here, they preemptively closed all of the schools in Flintshire, in parts of Powys as well, even into Wrexham. Some distance from here, they closed some schools. School transport in some areas has also been cancelled because of the concern about those conditions. It is this sleet, the snow, the potential that strong winds will cause some drifts as well. And what we've seen throughout the winter, the danger that creates power cuts, disruption on the roads, the rails, and even flights as well. The issue is this warmer temperatures moving up from the south, hitting the cold air, which makes it quite unpredictable as to where the snow might fall, where the worst areas will be affected. But the warnings are out there, and certainly this morning, a decent amount of snow and sleet, but not really settling even at quite high elevations right now.
Doing the tweets. Okay, for now, thank you, thanks. Kirsty's here. Honestly, a bit of snow and we all lose our minds.
I know, and we get terribly excited in the weather department as well, because everybody loves snow. But the problem is...
The first snow we love.
Yeah. Yeah, and once it actually is on the ground, then it's a whole different story. Because it comes with it things like freezing rain, and that's when you get things falling onto frozen surfaces. So you can get rain that instantly freezes, and you get black ice. It's terribly difficult for driving. And it's really tricky in this country to work out when it is going to be rain, sleet or snow. I mean, other countries maybe...
Is that your fault?
It is all my fault, always my fault. Other countries laugh at us because we can't cope with a tiny bit of snow, but that's because we always tend to hover around that 0 degree mark, so just a degree either side of that, you've either got rain or you've got snow. And so we're just within that very small boundary of when it happens. So through today, we've got the weather warnings out in force. We've got the threat of the rain pushing northwards. So rain in the south and the warnings. And then further north is more likely to be sleet and snow, especially over the hills. And you can just pick out the amber warnings coming into force today across North Wales and the Pennines, interestingly shaped dinosaur and a little mini UK we can spot there. But widely across the UK, we've got more warnings in force for the snow and ice. But those are the areas over the higher ground, so above 200, 300 metres, where we might see that 20 to 25 centimetres of snow today, which will be really disruptive. Strong and gusty easterly wind mixed in with that. As I mentioned, possibly freezing rain as well, so really horrible conditions if you can avoid travelling within those areas. But further south, pretty grim in the rain. And then further north, the snow risk transfers with parts of Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland as well. I've got yellow warnings there. So for all of us, it's a real wintry feel today, a bit of a mix, and it's an awkward one.
That was a vivid imagination to see that as a mini UK and a dinosaur print.
Yeah.
I mean,
tells you what's going on with my brain, doesn't it?
It really does. There you go, look. Maybe, no.
Yeah.
No.
What do you see?
Well, I don't see that, I have to say, but I do see what's coming up for the rest of us.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Rain spreading from the southwest will turn increasingly to sleet and snow over central parts today. The Met Office have amber warnings for snow over central Britain, while yellow warnings for snow, ice and rain apply to much of the UK and Ireland. Northern parts are fine if frosty, while the south is wet and windy with snow for parts of Ireland and Wales, mainly on higher ground.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's bring in our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, joining us from Belfast. Interesting to hear from Mary Lou McDonald, who wants to be the next president of Ireland, the Republic, that she wants to see a referendum on a united Ireland before 2030.
Yes, worth, I think, considering that alongside the most recent polls, Kay, predictably, a decisive 64% of people in the Republic of Ireland are in favour of Irish unity. In Northern Ireland, it's not so clear-cut. Only 30% in favour, 50% against and 20% undecided. But there are two key factors for me in the most recent Ipsos poll in the Irish Times last December. The number of unionists in Northern Ireland who say they would not be able to accept Irish unity has fallen from 32% to 23%. That's very significant. And believe it or not, 60% of people in Northern Ireland, unionist and nationalist, believe there should be a referendum in the next 10 years. So we think what Mary Lou McDonald is predicting is fairly realistic, that a vote will take place in the next decade. What's less predictable is what the outcome of that vote will be.
Also interesting to hear from her her comments on the Prime Minister Sunak and what he said in the chamber in front of Brianna's mother yesterday.
Yes, her older brother having transitioned to female some time ago. It's not something she talks a lot about, but she was very forthright in calling for the Prime Minister to at least apologise or to go as far as to clarify his position. But these are the sort of sensitive issues that she's going to have to talk about, of course, as she embarks upon a campaign to become the next Irish Prime Minister, the next Taoiseach. The party has fallen a little in the polls recently. Perhaps that's because of its position on the Middle East. The party has always been very pro-Palestinian and has been accused of being a bit hypocritical also by choosing to go to the White House to mark St Patrick's Day as always. But if Mary Lou McDonald is serious about leading the next government in the Republic of Ireland, she's going to have to navigate her way through all of these sensitive issues at home and abroad, including personal issues like the one she's been talking about this morning.
Did I say president when I meant Prime Minister when I was chatting to you earlier?
Not to worry.
And you were very elegant and didn't correct me. I'm a numpty. I'm very, very sorry. See, Prime Minister, it's easy. Thanks very much indeed, David. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, a volcano in Iceland erupts for the third time in just 3 months. Prince Harry's whirlwind trip to the UK, and also how his brother Prince William is coping with his first speech since news of the King's cancer diagnosis.
I guess I'm going down, 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 and I feel I'm going to drown.
You may not recognise this group, but you're probably very familiar with a lot of their work. We'll tell you more coming up. again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Prince Harry's flying visit to the UK. It was literally a flying visit, 24 hours. He's already back in LA. Apparently, I was reading that in the Daily Mail this morning, Robert Jobson was saying that he'd spoken to people who he took it on himself to come, and the King was left kicking his heels, waiting for him to come before he then went up to Sandringham. Interesting.
Interesting indeed.
What's going on with this volcano then?
This is Iceland. This is its third eruption now in about 3 or so months. Since December. Fountains of lava there. This crack's about 3 kilometres or so long, 1.8 miles. And this is a part of Iceland where there had been volcanic activity since about 2021, but it had been dormant for 800 years. And it's led to the evacuation of the fishing town Grindavik. And many locals saying they don't think they'll ever return.
Looks amazing.
It's striking, isn't it? And it's scary, absolutely terrifying. But it's also the kind of the wonders of nature.
Yeah, it feels weirdly less contained, doesn't it, than if it was a more, a funnel volcano, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned the Blue Lagoon, geothermal spas nearby. They were evacuated just recently in the last few hours or so when this all started to
and it's near the airport, and it's near Reykjavik, the capital. So, yeah, it can cause some serious issues.
Certainly can. And also, I guess, some tourist draws as well, potentially.
Yeah. What else have we got?
We've got the news about Brianna Ghey, don't we? The father of the murdered trans teenager has demanded an apology from the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak aimed a political jibe at Sir Keir Starmer, saying that he'd broken promises on defining a woman. On this programme, the policing minister insisted that Mr Sunak was talking about Keir Starmer's flip-flops and U-turns. Sky News understands that Labour is ditching its policy of spending £28 billion a year on its green investment. That's despite one of his ministers telling this programme yesterday that the plan was definitely going ahead. US officials claim that 3 members of the Kata'ib Hezbollah militia have been killed in a drone strike, including a high-ranking commander. The strike hit a car in the Iraqi capital. And a British expat has told Sky News that a plot to kidnap a child was being hatched in the Portuguese holiday resort of Praia da Luz a week before Madeleine McCann went missing.
Let's talk more about what's going on with the Royals. Jack is here for us. So I was just sharing with the team, actually, that the suggestion is that Harry took it upon himself to come here to see his father.
Yeah, I mean, that's not hugely surprising given how fast he arrived. Visiting the Royals usually takes time to organise, even when they're in Britain, to be completely honest about it. And he touched down in the UK and was face-to-face with his father less than 24 hours after we found out the diagnosis. I did a bit of maths last night, and he travelled approximately 366 miles per minute he spent with Charles. Because it was a 30-minute meeting. Look, it would be very tempting for Harry, I think, to feel slightly rebuffed or maybe even slightly rejected based on how short and brief that was. I don't think he should. I think, we know Charles held up the helicopter. I'm sure we'll get under Harry's skin with the fact that that came out.
No, there's no love lost between the two. I don't mean Jobson, I mean the Daily Mail and
The Daily Mail and Harry, yes, indeed. But I do still think all of this is positive. A big part of the way that the Queen forged an incredible relationship with the British public was this idea of service through sacrifice. So the fact that Harry's put himself on the line, travelled all this way, been slightly rebuffed and then got straight home again, and, even if he does look slightly silly doing it, I think it's still actually will, go down well and help to heal old wounds.
Here's the thought, why didn't he go to Sandringham?
Well, this is exactly what I was thinking, just go to Sandringham and see Charles there. Yeah, I mean, only Charles knows that, I suppose. It's entirely possible he just simply wasn't invited, but it would have been
quite clearly wasn't invited. He could have got on the chopper with them, couldn't he, really?
Well, he could have stayed, he stayed in a hotel, but if he'd gone to Sandringham, he could have had a room, there's plenty of space there. So, yeah, that is the big question.
What's the relationship like between him and Camilla, given his book?
Well, I'd imagine it's terrible, and perhaps that's the reason. One can only speculate, but, I think Camilla was possibly the person who came off worst out of everybody, and with some allegations from Harry that related to her motives for things that he alleged that she had done. Now, understanding another person's motives is incredibly difficult. Some people don't understand their own motives. How Harry knows that Camilla was motivated by this desire to install herself as Queen Consort and doing various things that he hasn't evidenced anyway is, beyond me.
Yeah, this is the last picture that we've seen of the King reporting of late. This was when I think he'd left Clarence House on his way to Buckingham Palace to get on the chopper to take him to Sandringham. At that stage, we were being told that he would carry out quite a lot of his duties, including weekly audiences for the Prime Minister with the King. We're now being told that that will be over the phone.
Well, there's some confusion about this. So he's going to speak to Rishi Sunak over the phone, but there will be face-to-face meetings continuing. So I think that, you know, Charles wants clearly to send the message to the public that business is continuing, not as usual, but it is continuing, and there is not a break or stop in his role as monarch. We're not having councillors of state, for example. Nobody's having to actually stand in for him. Yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly what form of treatment he's receiving, but it may be that he has to be back in London anyway, in which case he might as well see Rishi face to face. And I suspect that that is what we're going to wind up seeing happening.
Yeah, I think it depends how much the treatment takes out of him.
Well, exactly. But we know Rishi will definitely also be going to him. So, I mean, he will know.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And a quick thought on Prince William, back to work with a quip.
With a quip, but actually, interestingly, he was all smiles on his way in, and he had these jokes written into his speech. But if you actually watch the delivery of the speech, I think you could actually see the weight of the world on his shoulders as he told these jokes, which, you know, he's usually very, you know, laughing and affable and light-hearted in the way that he delivers jokes in his speeches, but you could really see a slightly different tone in him last night.
Yeah, it was it's a challenging time for him with his father and also his wife recovering, convalescing. And 3 young children.
And 3 young children to handle, yes, exactly. So Kate, you know, we still haven't seen or heard from her, which is completely fine. She needs to recover and she needs to focus on her health. But clearly she will have had some lifestyle changes that William has been helping her, you know, come to terms with and cope with.
And he didn't see his brother while he was here?
No, which is not a huge surprise. I
mean, but it tells us all we need to know, doesn't it?
Yes, confirms everything we already...
Exactly, exactly. It's good to see you.
Yeah.
Twice in a week?
Yes.
Nice to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Let me bring you some pictures from Iceland. These are live pictures. There you go. This is about... I'm trying to figure out how far it is away from Reykjavik. It's probably only about 20 or 30 kilometres away from the capital. This is a volcano that has now erupted 3 times since November. The nearby fishing village has been evacuated, Grindavik, for some time now. But as you can see, with good reason, as the volcano continues to erupt. I'm being told, to be precise, 35 miles away from the capital and thus the airport. We know what Icelandic volcanoes can do to airspace, don't we? Let's talk about a British expat. He's told Sky News that a plot to kidnap a child was being hatched in the Portuguese holiday resort of Praia de Luz. Why is that important? It's an intriguing story that comes from a man who was living among a bohemian nomadic community in a very remote part of Portugal, southwest part of the country, 17 years ago. A story that emerged from an emotional late-night conversation beside a campfire in the woods, and it emerged a week before Madeleine vanished.
The teepee was around in here somewhere.
We're in a remote part of the Algarve, 20 miles from Praia de Luz. It's 17 years since Ken Ralphs visited the hidden tent where his friend lived.
It's private property now, it's owned by somebody.
It was the night his friend, who can't be named for legal reasons, told him about a plot to abduct a child.
We had a few beers, and then obviously during the early hours of the morning, started to cry. Well, then he confessed to me he was getting involved with Christian to take a child from Praia de Luz from a rich family.
The Christian they were talking about, he said, was a German drifter and a man they both knew in the nomadic community. Christian B, as he's known, is the main suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, but he's not been charged over it.
I said, it's ridiculous, don't do this. What are you getting involved with people like this for? You can't kidnap a child and ask for a ransom, you'll end up going to jail. He said, it's not about a ransom, it's about selling the child to a German couple who couldn't have children.
A week later, Madeleine vanished. Mr Ralphs was on a trip to England when he heard the news.
Some more breaking news for you this morning. We're just hearing that a search is underway for a 3-year-old British girl who's gone missing in the Algarve area of Portugal.
Mr Ralphs says he contacted police in Cumbria.
They just said, to the police, look, you need to... Here's the secret map of how you get to this point here. And I said, that must be sent immediately to Portugal.
Mr Ralphs put his evidence into a detailed statement and on his return to Portugal spoke to local police.
They said, have you made your statement to the police? I said, yeah. They said, well, don't worry, go home. If they need to contact you, they will. And of course, for endless years, nobody did contact me.
When Christian B was revealed as a suspect 4 years ago, Mr Ralphs contacted police again.
You told the UK police in 2007. You told them again in 2020.
Yeah, I've sent my statement to the German prosecution.
And then what happened?
And then they've just sent it straight back to Scotland Yard.
So what's happened to...
They found him.
And did he back up your story?
Well, he said he doesn't know us. I have 12 independent witnesses that can prove he's lying.
It's difficult to know where Ken Ralph's evidence fits into the Madeleine McCann case. He certainly had several exchanges with Scotland Yard investigators, and the idea that there was a plan to steal a child is backed up by a friend of the suspect.
Mikhail Tucher, once a close pal of Christian B, has said he talked about selling children to make money. And Scotland Yard detectives have always believed that whatever her ultimate fate, Madeleine was abducted in a carefully planned operation.
So what happens next?
It's difficult to know. I mean, Mr Ralphs, the man I spoke to, doesn't quite understand what the police are doing with his information, but presumably it's fed into years of gathering of evidence against Christian B. But let's remind viewers that he absolutely denies any involvement in the Madeleine disappearance. But he is on trial next week in Germany for unrelated matters, 5 sex charges that emanate from events in Portugal over many years. But that's completely separate to the Madeleine McCann investigation.
OK, for now. Thanks very much, Martin. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, going to be talking about why Labour has been forced to ditch its green investment pledge. Plus...
I guess I'm going down, 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 and I feel I'm going to drown.
The most influential band you've probably never heard of.
Well, I've always wanted to do pantomime. Ever since I was about 6, 7 years old, I wanted to be an actor. And my first experience of live theatre, like with a lot of children, was pantomime. But there was just no workshops, there was no training, there was no worthwhile developmental chances or opportunities. So as soon as I read about the Masters in Panto in the stage, I had to do it. Not a lot of people get it. Not a lot of people understand. People think I'm joking when I tell them. But I think pantomime is a quintessentially British tradition. Everyone in Britain recognises it. It's the lifeblood of our nation and one of the best things to come out of our country. So when you tell international audiences what panto is, they're not quite sure exactly because it is such a British thing. I think people are being more cautious in terms of representation and inclusivity. If I'll try that again, and inclusivity. I think there's a lot more stories to tell. I mean, with panto, you can tell different points of view of stories. It can go anywhere. That's what's so great about panto is it can be molded and adapted and explored in very many different ways. So the first module looked at the historical background of panto, how it developed from the Victorian age and how it took its influences from clowning. And then the second module looked at actual pantomime techniques. So we took routines such as the ghost gag. When you have the actors on stage, you have the ghost creeping in behind the actors on the stage, and all the kids saying, "It's behind you." We actually looked at the mechanics of that stock routine and what it takes to execute that, to the point where you're getting the laughs. And then the third module, as you see from the clips, we got to direct, produce and write our own panto, and we took that to local communities around Staffordshire, and we got to invite producers to come along and watch.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Let's bring in Wilfred now, should we? Standing by for us at Sky Centre. Hi, Wilfred. So yesterday, Chris Bryant was on the show and he was telling me there is well, let's hear what he said. Talk to me about your £28 billion Green Pledge. Where are we with that? What on earth is happening?
We are doing it.
When?
We're doing it in the next Parliament.
OK, towards the end of the next Parliament?
I can't tell you a precise day of the week and what month it's going to be, but our determination, our plan, our intent is to get it done.
24 hours later, Wilfred, what's happening?
Well, we are expecting Labour to roll back on that £28 billion pledge at some point today. Interestingly, I'm also wondering, Kay, who they're going to send out to do this. Now, it was Rachel Reeves, of course, back in 2021 that initially announced it. Some say kind of against her wishes because she wanted to focus on that fiscal responsibility aspect. Will it be Rachel Reeves that comes out to roll back on it, or will it be someone else? And who will take the flak? I would imagine, Kay, so Chris Bryant will be rather upset he wasn't in on this decision coming, because it will makes everyone look a little bit embarrassed, particularly if it was yesterday.
Exactly that. Would you not think that it's something that the leader would have to take the hit for?
Well, you'd think that, wouldn't you? And to the short term on this, whether it was a month ago in an interview with me, whether it was earlier this week in an interview with Times Radio, he recommitted to this pledge. And I think the other subsector to watch is whether they still also pledge to try and deliver clean energy by 2030, which, of course, is where the 28 billion figure came from, or whether they'll say, oh, we're still going to meet that goal, but we're just going to pay for it another way. And of course, if they do the latter, then I think this story will live on. If they don't, they'll get some grief for abandoning their principles for a couple of days, but they might be able to move on from this debate. It's interesting. Sir Craig Oliver, of course, a former Tory communications chief, was tweeting this morning to say, actually, this will annoy the Tories, this U-turn. They'll only get a couple of days of stories from it, as opposed to it being something that they'd want to lean on for many weeks to come.
We'll see you from 10, Wilfred. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Right, have a listen to this music.
I guess I'm going down, 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 and I feel I'm going to drown.
That's Simanti. Now, they're probably the most popular band you've never heard of. Joining us here, Patrick and Steve, members of the band. Tell me about, go back first of all to the 1970s, because that sort of riff, people will think, oh, I've heard that. Where have I heard that from? Tell me.
The music has become popular over the years since we came off the road. Through sampling, a lot of people know us by virtue of hearing our music through sample, through other artists. Which is a wonderful thing because it's kept the band alive.
Which ones in particular?
The Message, Bra, Dove.
Brothers on the Slide.
Brothers on the Slide, yeah.
Plenty.
Plenty. Yeah, it's very good. Very good for us.
And what's happened to you since you've been on tour?
Well, we came off the road in 1975 because we were pretty disillusioned with having had the success that we had in the US. We became quite disillusioned with the situation here in the UK, so we decided to take a break. It was intended to be a very short break, but it ended up being something like 40 plus years before we actually got back together again. Since
Part of the Windrush?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, I don't know why
We're
that
later.
says that there.
Yeah, we're later than
Okay,
the
don't know why it
Windrush
says
period.
that.
Our parents are of the Windrush
Oh, are
generation.
they? That's
I think
probably where
that's
that
where the
comes
connection
from.
is. Yes.
Yeah. How did your roots, family roots, help with your love of music and direction that you took?
I don't think it was so much my family roots. I mean, there's a lot of music in the community that we were part of in those days, and it's going back a long way. But my family was not involved in music in that sense. We were fortunate enough to be in a very vibrant community, really, musically and otherwise. So I suppose it's more the community than the actual family roots.
Yeah. Agreed.
Oh, God. No, just agree. Tell me more. I bet you're not the quiet one when you're not in front of a camera.
I'm always the quiet one.
Are you?
Yes. As Patrick says, we very much of a musical community, especially in the Caribbean. You know, the Caribbean is full of music. Wherever you go, you're hearing music. So when we connected in the UK, our parents were living a few doors from each other, and we connected through our parents. We both had an interest in music, and we started practicing and learning our instruments together. And then in the late 60s, we said, well, let's get a band together.
Amazing. Have you ever heard of the Sugar Man story?
Yes, it's a very interesting story. And I think about that oftentimes when, thinking about our own project.
That's what I was making the comparison with,
Yeah, it's a great comparison, actually. He came back, I suspect he's still alive. He came back and he did wonderful things. He was unheard of for ages, just like us. I mean, when we came off the road, people might have wondered, those who liked the band, what had become of us. But we were doing other projects. Steve and I became barristers. We went to a completely different field of operation for many years. And the music took on its own power through the sampling, fortunately for us.
Yeah. So what happens next? Are you going to have that resurgence like Sugar Man?
I think the resurgence has started.
It started, yes.
In actual fact,
there's been
documentaries is part of that.
There's been a lot of interest in the band. As you may be aware that there's been a documentary about the history of the band, and that documentary is being premiered on the 13th of this month, and then it goes on general release, I believe, on the 16th.
So where do we see it?
All over.
All over. When it's on when it's on general release, it's going to be.
The general release is the 16th of February.
Okay, fantastic. It's great to see you guys. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
You're barristers now. Are you still practicing?
Yeah. Yes, we're trying to manage the two professions because they're both very demanding.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. Look forward to seeing the documentary, 16th of February. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Let's end with some more of your music.
There's some music that's just bigger than music.
Well, this is the documentary, I'm guessing.
Gritty, it was raw, and in its creativity, it just has depth.
I guess I'm going down, 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 and I feel I'm going to drown.
Oh, I can't wait to see the documentary, guys. Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Rain spreading from the southwest will turn increasingly to sleet and snow over central parts. Today, the Met Office have amber warnings for snow over central Britain, while yellow warnings for snow, ice and rain apply to much of the UK and also to Ireland. Northern parts, fine, if frosty.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come, we're going to be bringing you more live pictures from a volcano that's now erupted for a third time in Iceland. All the latest on that. Good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, pressure grows on the Prime Minister to say sorry.
The dad of murdered trans girl Brianna Ghey told Sky News that comments made by Rishi Sunak were degrading and absolutely dehumanising.
Plus, Sir Keir Starmer's biggest U-turn yet.
Wonder what that is. Thursday, 8th of February. Downing Street insists the Prime Minister's comments were not transphobic. The policing minister telling me we should all be careful with our language.
I think there is a wider point here for politicians, for journalists, for everybody to keep in mind that when there are very sensitive issues being discussed, to always use respectful and measured language.
Fountains of lava light up the morning sky just over 30 miles from Reykjavik. Also ahead, 3 dead in a US drone strike on a busy street in the Iraqi capital. The plot to kidnap a child hatched a week before Madeleine McCann disappeared. Prince Harry returning to Los Angeles just 24 hours after a flying visit to see his dad.
So won't you make me dizzy from your kisses? Will you take my hand and spin me round?
And could this be the year Ollie Alexander teases his new Eurovision song, Dizzy? Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the breakfast programme on Sky News. Brianna Ghey's father has demanded an apology from the Prime Minister after he appeared to make a disparaging remark about transgender people in the House of Commons yesterday. We'll have more on that in just a second. But first, let us show you these amazing pictures coming to us live from Iceland. This is the footage from just outside Grindavik. Ivor is covering that event for us. This is the 3rd time since November that this volcano has erupted. It's only about 30 miles or so from the capital, Reykjavik, very close to the airport as well. And for those of you who've perhaps been to Iceland in the past and probably travelled to the tourist trap, the Blue Lagoon, it's literally next door to that. That has been evacuated for now, but the local village, the Grindavik village, has it's a fishing village really, has been evacuated since November when this first started to register for the scientists in Iceland. Before that, it was 800 years ago that they had this sort of challenge to face. Sadly, this is now the 3rd time in as many months that this volcano has erupted. As I said, Ivor will have more on that in just a moment. Before that, Brianna Ghey, her father, has described a jibe by the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday as degrading and absolutely dehumanising. Speaking for the government, Chris Philp told us a few moments ago the comments were not transphobic. It was legitimate criticism of Sir Keir Starmer. Why is it so hard for him to apologise?
Well, he was talking very clearly about Keir Starmer's flip-flops and U-turns. It was very clearly. It was very clearly, and I can see that. I was very, very sad to read those comments yesterday evening. I think Rishi Sunak did later in PMQs go out of his way to pay very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family. He didn't mention prior to that. He hadn't mentioned them at all. He was talking about Keir Starmer's policies. I think there is a wider point here for politicians, for journalists, for everybody to keep in mind that when there are very sensitive issues being discussed, to always use respectful and measured language, lest there are unintended consequences. But I think, I've listened to the clip a couple of times, and he was very clearly talking just about Keir Starmer's flip-flops.
But the family is offended.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I was very sad to read those comments. But I've listened to the clip. I think your viewers should listen to the clip as well, or view the clip. I think you may have played it earlier, and it was clear he was talking about Keir Starmer's flip-flops. And he mentioned a whole range of different issues.
The family's offended, and they've lost their child.
Yeah.
I mean, saying sorry is not a big deal when someone's lost their child and they're turning to the Prime Minister and saying, you have degraded and dehumanised my child.
Yeah, and he did. And when he was asked about this, when Rishi Sunak was asked about this, he paid very fulsome, as I said already, very fulsome tribute to Brianna and her family.
So this is the $64,000 question, Mari, for you. Is he going to have to apologise?
It's hard to say, Kay. there are two options now. Rishi Sunak can continue to stick to his guns. His ministers will continue to go out on the airwaves again and again and again, making excuses for him and trying to say, once again, it was a point about Keir Starmer's flip-flopping on policy. Now, that is a dangerous choice to make, because if the calls don't quieten down for apologies, we know that Brianna Ghey's father has already called for an apology, and to an extent that is one of the most important voices in this debate.
Of course.
How is that going to look if he continues to look like he's not backing down against parents who've lost their child?
Yeah.
The other option is he holds his hand up and says, I'm sorry, the way I said it or the timing of what I said or however he wants to phrase it was unfortunate. I didn't mean to offend you. That's not what I meant. Let's have a chat about online safety and see if we can hash this out and make the world a better place. But that choice really should have been made sooner rather than later, so he doesn't look like he's now being bounced into it by public pressure and by the media. So it's kind of like a situation now where actually both options are pretty bad for the Prime Minister, and to an extent some of the reputational damage to him and his party will have already been done. We already know some Conservative MPs have come out this morning and yesterday saying that they were disappointed and unhappy with the comments from the Prime Minister. There will be more behind the scenes who are secretly, privately very frustrated with the comments that we saw in the chamber.
Yeah.
So I think the unhappiness in the Conservative Party will also impact on morale, and therefore how MPs feel about their Prime Minister and their electoral prospects. I mean, let's not forget it's an election year, so all these things matter just that little bit more.
What did you make of what the Minister said when he said politicians and journalists need to be more cautious with their words?
I took that as a very, very veiled, essentially a veiled criticism of the Prime Minister. Chris Philp was talking about how he was very saddened to hear what Brianna Ghey's father had said about the comments being dehumanising. And interestingly, he made a point of saying that there needed to be more kind of note-taking from politicians about sensitivities and sensitive issues and making sure that they don't essentially have unintended consequences of the comments that they make. That felt to me like a bit of a very gentle dig at the Prime Minister because he was on the airwaves to defend him, but nonetheless he essentially wanted to acknowledge that it wasn't really what he would have done or what he would have said.
This is what Mary Lou McDonald from Sinn Féin thought about it all.
You know, I think it's disappointing if anybody in leadership uses an issue around a person's identity, their gender identity, their sense of self, to try and score a political point against another. I just think that's very unwelcome. I would imagine that the Prime Minister, if he's thoughtful, would apologise for that or clarify his position. I think that would be very useful.
It was interesting what Mary Lou McDonald had to say, because she had a personal stake in this debate where she's acknowledged that her sister is trans. And so she was very, very critical of the Prime Minister and essentially said that there is a line, even in politics, when politics can get very rough, very savage, and MPs often take chunks out of each other at the dispatch box. But nonetheless, she felt that actually Rishi Sunak had crossed a line when it comes to using or kind of capitalising on the suffering of vulnerable communities, and they needed to be protected rather than dragged into political debates and scoring points.
Yeah, he was talking, actually, he says, about flip-flopping, and potentially that's what Labour has done. Again, we're going to be talking to Wilfred about that a bit later on. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Meantime, a volcano in Iceland is erupting for the third time in as many months. Let's have a look at these latest pictures that we're receiving here at Sky Centre. Pretty dramatic stuff, isn't it? Erupted again within the last couple of hours or so, Ivor.
Yeah, that's right. It started at 6 o'clock this morning local time. This is the Silingafell volcano. Apologies to any Icelandic speakers for the dodgy pronunciation there. But this is the
sounded good to me.
Well, thank you very much. This is the third eruption in 2 months. The first was just before Christmas, you might remember. The second about a month ago. And as I say, the third starting at 6 o'clock this morning, producing these really quite spectacular images of these fountains of lava spewing up from this fissure that's opened up in the ground, this huge crack. It's now 3 kilometres long. Each time it seems to get a little bit bigger. Just north of this town called Grindavik, which we've been reporting on previously, and our science team actually reported from a couple of months ago. There's not thought to be any danger to life at this stage because the residents of Grindavik have already been evacuated from there, all 4,000 of them or so. The Blue Lagoon Spa, one of Iceland's top tourist spots, that was closed this morning when the eruption began. guests were taken to hotels. Now, Iceland is, of course, no stranger to seismic activity either. It's home to more than 30 volcanic systems. It apparently averages an eruption every 4 to 5 years. The question for them and the issue is that they just don't know how long these eruptions are going to continue, because apparently they have already warned that there will be more because the land in the area has physically risen because of a build-up of magma underneath. I mean, that is a pretty terrifying thought, isn't it?
And it's because of tectonic plates, I think I'm right in saying, which you have snorkeled between.
Yes, you can snorkel between the Eurasian and the American plates. There's a fissure in the sulphur in the plates, I think, moving apart by 2 centimetres a year or something. Remarkable there. Absolutely remarkable. Water was 2 degrees, it was freezing.
Was it? And we saw you in a wetsuit.
You saw me in a wetsuit in a picture that was less than flattering.
Yeah. Is he talking to you again now?
No, not yet.
No, fair enough. What else have you got for us?
We're going to start with Iraq, because a US drone strike has killed 3 members of an Iran-backed militia, Kata'ib Hezbollah. Let's get the latest from Alex Crawford.
Kata'ib Hezbollah is one of the armed, very powerful Iran-backed fighting groups in Iraq, and the death of him, the killing of him on a busy civilian street in eastern Baghdad is likely to provoke even more anger today. We went to the scene last night, and in the early hours of the morning, the car that he was travelling in with another member of Kata'ib Hezbollah and a third person we think was the driver. There was a huge crowd there chanting anti-American, anti-foreigner slogans. This is likely to raise the temperature massively. There's a lot of anger about the stationing of US troops in Iraq anyway, and calls immediately from a number of the Iran armed groups, the proxies across the whole region, from not just Iraq, but Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Bahrain. I spoke to the Iraqi security people this morning. Major General Tasneem Al-Kafaji said this new aggression undermines all understanding. We hold the American side and coalition forces responsible for the repercussions of these dangerous acts, which threaten the security of Iraq and the region. There are expected to be hundreds, possibly thousands of people who turn out for the funerals of this high-ranking commander. Already the Iraqi Prime Minister and President had said that this threatened Iraq's sovereignty, and there's likely to be more calls condemning that today.
For the first time, global warming breached the internationally agreed upon threshold for an entire year. In 2015, world leaders agreed that global average temperatures shouldn't exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, higher than pre-industrial levels. However, the EU's climate service shows that from February 2023 to January 2024, that figure was 1.52 degrees. Taking Viagra could reduce a man's chance of developing Alzheimer's. A study by University College London, which involved more than 260,000 men, found that those prescribed the drug were less likely to develop the disease. Alzheimer's UK says more research is needed to confirm the results. Sky News understands that Labour is to ditch its £28 billion green investment pledge. It follows months of speculation, but the front-runner, Chris Bryant, insisted on this programme just yesterday that the policy would stay.
Talk to me about your £28 billion green pledge. Where are we with that? What on earth is happening?
We are doing it.
When?
We're doing it in the next Parliament.
OK. Towards the end of the next Parliament?
I can't tell you a precise day of the week and what month it's going to be, but our determination, our plan, our intent is to get it done.
That was yesterday. Let's get more on the King's health and a fleeting visit by Prince Harry. Look who's here with us. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Talk to me.
So I think there's so much discussion, isn't there, about the fact that we think that Prince Harry saw his father for, what, only half an hour, 45 minutes. And this week we've been talking so much about how they are, in some ways, a normal family, been touched by this cancer diagnosis. But they're not normal, are they? So in terms of the way that Harry or even William would see their father, the time frame, that's always, over the years, probably going to have been restricted. We were talking about it. Was Harry, did he take it in his own hands to come back? It wouldn't surprise me if he did. The whole point that the Sussexes wanted to make when they stepped away from royal life was we want to do things our own way. But in some ways, I know Harry gets really heavily criticised, but he'd be damned if he did and damned if he didn't, wouldn't he? If he hadn't bothered to come over, we'd all been saying how insensitive, heartless young man.
Yeah.
So it's a really tricky one. But the optics of it don't look good, do they? That he basically turned up, was there for half an hour, and then left, and then the King and
Why didn't he go
Queen
to
went.
Sandringham instead of Claret's house?
Funny you should ask that, because one of the first things that I did was I text the King's Communications Secretary saying, was Harry in the back of one of those police vehicles heading into Buckingham Palace? Has he gone to Sandringham?
No.
But no. And that to me would have been the natural thing.
Yeah.
And in terms of that sense of reconciliation, are they getting on better? Wouldn't it have been so much better for the royal family? But I think it's, again, a sign of just how fractured that relationship has become. And yeah,
Not least because of the Queen. I mean, he was very rude about the Queen.
That's the thing. You cannot forget about how critical he was in Spare, in the docuseries. A lot of very unkind things have been said. Of course, supporters of the Sussexes would say they have every right to come out and criticise the family if they felt that they weren't being treated in the right way. But again, it's a reminder that this is a very disjointed, in some ways dysfunctional family. And we'll just keep watching it as it continues, as we keep a check on the King's condition, won't it?
A reminder that words have consequences, perhaps.
They do indeed.
Brianna, thank you. Now, let's talk about the future of Ireland, should we, north and south of the border. A little earlier, Sinn Féin President Mary Lou McDonald predicted that a referendum on unity would happen before 2030. What timescale are we talking about?
I envisage us having the referendums in this decade. So
before 2030?
Yes, and let me say that is not so far away, so there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done.
David Blevins is with us live from Belfast. What do you make of that then, David?
Well, there is Mary Lou McDonald's hope, Kay, and then there is the reality of the most recent polling in last December's Irish Times. An Ipsos poll indicated that 30% of people in Northern Ireland would vote for Irish unity, but 50% would vote right now to remain part of the United Kingdom, with the other 20% either undecided or not planning to vote. But there were two key figures in that Ipsos poll last December. One pointing out that the number of unionists who say they could never accept Irish unity has fallen from 32% to 23%. I think that is significant. And even though 50% right now are saying they wouldn't vote for Irish unity, 60% say there should be a border poll in the next 10 years. So I think it's a realistic possibility that there could be a referendum in the next 10 years. What's less predictable is the outcome of that referendum.
Indeed. So it was interesting also that she opened up about her elder sister, who is trans. Rarely talks about that, but running for Prime Minister later on this year in the Republic, whenever that might happen, she's going to be asked about it, isn't she?
Yes, and she, I suppose, with that personal experience, has been able to navigate some of these sensitive issues. Just over a year ago, she talked about her older sibling having transitioned from male to female and was very supportive. At the time, she said, we only get one life, there is not a dress rehearsal, and that we must be true to ourselves. And that is the kind of sensitivity she's going to have to display as she navigates her way through all sorts of things, both personally, at home in Ireland and on an international stage. We know she's also been in the headlines recently, and it's quite possibly the reason for a dip in the polls for the party over their stance on the Middle East, because they've always been very pro-Palestinian, for example, but are going to be wined and dined in the Oval Office at the White House as usual on St. Patrick's Day, and some people think that's hypocritical, but those are the sort of issues she's going to have to weave a route through in her attempt to become the next Taoiseach, the next Irish Prime Minister, and that, of course, is the ultimate aspiration for Sinn Féin, to have a Prime Minister in Dublin and a First Minister in Belfast.
Indeed. So for now, David, thank you. Looking at today's weather for you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Rain spreading from the southwest will turn increasingly to sleet and snow over central parts. The Met Office have amber warnings for snow over central Britain, while yellow warnings for snow, ice and rain apply to much of the UK and Ireland. Northern parts are finely frosty now, while the south is wet and windy, with snow for parts of Ireland, Wales and mainly on the higher ground.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come on the breakfast programme for you here on Sky News. A day trip abroad. Is it for you? We'll be chatting about a new extreme travel trend. Hello again, everybody. Coming up, can faith in British policing be restored after a series of embarrassing cases exposing the misogyny? We're going to be speaking to Baroness Casey and former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. That to come. But first, you can see that Claire is here with us, from the head of travel, of course, at the Times and the Sunday Times, to talk about extreme day tripping. What is it?
That's right. Well, it's addictive, I can tell you that.
OK.
It is essentially going somewhere for the day and fitting as much as you possibly can into that day and then coming back. So you don't pay for accommodation, you don't have to take much annual leave if it's midweek. It's obviously much cheaper midweek, it's much cheaper to travel, trains, planes, and it's like a little micro holiday all in one.
OK, have you ever done it?
Well, if going for lunch counts, then yes, I've done that many times. But to be honest, it's
not your thing, is it?
Very stressful, and it just sounds like getting to work.
OK. What about you, Madam?
No, absolutely not. I'm totally with you. I want, as long as possible, I want the ratio between the travel and the holiday to be quite stark. So I want, you know, maximum holiday days, minimum travel time. So it's not for me.
Yeah. Of course you have.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like a decent holiday. I think as kids, you think the summer holidays always last 6 weeks, and then you become an adult and you struggle to get a fortnight.
Yeah.
So I like a good 2 weeks if you can manage it. But also kind of like the jeopardy of trying to achieve something. So popped to New York. There we are. That was me 5, 6 years ago. New York, obviously, for about 36 hours. But it was the travel was the extreme part because the airline that I'd chosen to fly with folded because one of their aircrafts had corrosion, and then the train to the airport missed the station and had to do an emergency stop and then reverse back down the line.
OK, I think 36 hours more than enough in New York for me, let me tell you. Where do other people go? I'm guessing Paris and...
Well, yeah, I mean, Europe is a big draw. I mean, certainly, you know, this is not a great trend. It's not a great trend for the climate. So going to Paris and Amsterdam and so on, you can go by train, so it's much better than going by plane. But, I mean, people are going as far as New York. A colleague of mine has done the New York day trip as well, because travelling overnight doesn't count. So you're allowed to do that. It's just paying for accommodation in destination. And, of course, you know, with hotel prices rising the way that they are, particularly in cities, you can see why people want to get the maximum experience for the minimum outlay.
I'm guessing you have to do an awful lot of research. You can't just land on it.
Oh, no, and I think... I follow a few pages now and, let's say, got caught up in the planning. And it is really exciting. You know, people are posting... It's back to the old days of Ryanair and EasyJet sales. You know, they're posting cheap flights. People are rushing in with itineraries and suggestions. And that's really exciting. I mean, if you've got the time and you like the planning, I think, you know, that's a really big part of the draw.
But you can also do extreme day tripping while you're in another country.
You can. And you can take a trip off to, say, Milan from Bologna. We've just actually covered that. You know, really exciting days out that kind of... I mean, well, we've all been doing it for decades on package holidays, for example. That's what your Shorex and your excursions are all about.
Now, you won't be surprised to learn that I did this up a mountain.
It doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
I was in Cusco. And in order to get ready to do the Inca Trail, I went to Soria Pompa, which looks on the map like it's not very far. But this is the sort of challenge that you face.
I love that this is your preparation for another challenge. This, to me, is just the ultimate challenge.
Yeah, but when you get to the top of Soria Pompa, it was unbelievable. I mean, that was me halfway up thinking I'm not sure if I'm ever going to get to the top. Even before I got to the base of Soria Pompa, the roads are so bad in this part of Peru that it took us a bone-jarring 4 hours of driving.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fun. That's the adventure.
That is adventure, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you know, the ultimate way to do extreme day tripping would be to go to a destination, or the more ecological way to do it, go to a destination and then do your extreme day trips from there, as you have done.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it was a lot of fun, I have to say. But you do have to prepare yourself. What sort of places do not lend themselves to that sort of thing? I mean, like a country like, I'm guessing like France or Paris, where they're all pretty laid back and you're rushing around, then you're going to not necessarily be very friendly with the locals, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, where you don't want to be if you are... lots of people following these groups are mums, for example, who want to do it around school runs. So you don't want to be somewhere where that infrastructure is not reliable. You know, you don't want to be too rural, too... you need to be somewhere where you've got backup options. Yes. And because a lot of this is about getting the earliest flight out or the earliest train and the latest one back, you need to give yourself some wiggle room within that.
Have we tempted you?
Well, to be fair, I mean, if it's not too far, I would do it. Like when I used to live in the south of France, I used to go to Italy for the day.
Yeah.
And the train was about an hour, and you'd go, you'd have a lovely day out, and you'd go back, and that was easy.
Yes.
But at the same time, there were times you'd get to the train station, and it's France, so they're on strike, then you have to go home. Yeah. So you have to be flexible with your plans. So I could do it, you know, if it's a small amount of travelling, but anywhere far, New York, no way, Gareth. Absolutely no, not for me.
So your day trips without the extreme?
Yeah, basically, just massively laid back with absolutely no bookings and no plans.
Where can we find out more about it?
times travel.
OK, there you go. Plug in right at the end. It's good to see you as always, Claire. We'll see you next week, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you extreme day tripping next week because it's half term?
Actually, my half term's the week after.
Oh, OK. We will see you next week then.
You will.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show. How can the police restore trust with the public? We'll discuss sexism and misogyny in the force with Baroness Casey and the former Australian PM, Julia Gillard. Had the same frock on there as I've got on today.
Yes, I kind of looked and all of a sudden realised I was looking back at myself.
It was a bit weird,
surprising.
wasn't it? And a bit of déjà vu when it comes to Iceland as well.
Yes, the third eruption since December now. Remarkable pictures, but obviously big impact on the communities around Grindavik. That fissure of lava.
It's 3 kilometres long is what we're being told. Third time since November that this volcano has erupted. And the Grindavik village, fishing village, there's nobody there at the moment. It was evacuated some time ago. But Blue Lagoon, which is a tourist attraction, as we know, was evacuated again this morning. And I think I'm right in saying there's a hotel there. So probably some challenges for people who are staying there, but they've all been moved away for their own safety.
I've wanted to try and pronounce the Icelandic name all morning, but as yet, I still haven't mastered it.
You're working on it.
I'll work on it. I'll come back. Let's bring you, though, the top stories this morning. The father of the murdered trans teenager, Brianna Ghey, has demanded an apology from the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak aimed a political jibe at Keir Starmer, saying he'd broken promises on defining a woman. On this programme, the policing minister insisted Mr Sunak was talking about Keir Starmer's flip-flops and U-turns. US officials claim to have killed 3 members of an Iranian-backed militia group in Iraq. Those killed in the drone strike reportedly include a high-ranking commander. Sky News understands that Labour is ditching its policy of spending £28 billion a year on its green investment. That's despite one of his ministers telling this programme just yesterday that the plan was definitely going ahead. And the British expat has told Sky News that a plot to kidnap a child was being hatched in the Portuguese holiday resort of Praia da Luz a week before Madeleine McCann went missing.
Here's a question for you. How can trust be restored between the police and the public? That's the question Baroness Louise Casey and former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard will attempt to address today. Good morning to both of you. Tell me what the plan is.
I think Louise is more expert on the plan, but what we're doing at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, which I've got the privilege of chairing at King's College London, is releasing today a local area index about violence against women and girls, and it's the first instalment on a UK gender equality index. And what it's telling us is we've got a substantial problem. We actually don't know enough about it because we don't have common reporting, common definitions, common transparency, and we need to build that. And clearly, building a culture within the police which is inclusive of women is incredibly important. And Louise is known for many, many things, but particularly for that groundbreaking Met Review, which has charted the course for us.
Yeah, that detailed piece of work that we were also very aware of when it was released, Baroness Casey. Do you think anything has changed within the Met?
So it's very hard to tell at this stage. They're less than a year on from when I published the report. For me, their scorecard remains unmarked. And I was very clear that I think what will be needed, Kay, is that somebody like me, if not me, should go back in at the halfway point, say in a year, year and a half, and rerun a version of that review so we can double test it. I have to say that I think, I published that review, it was specifically on the Metropolitan Police in London. But of course, there are much wider issues about how we deal with violence against women and children. Actually, we always say violence against women and girls, but boys are also subjected to different forms of violence and abuse in different ways. And then the other is it's men's violence. And I think that's what it's quite hard. Everybody keeps talking about this word Vogue. They don't even spell it out anymore, Kay. So I think that's one thing that really worries me and why I'm so supportive of the work that Julia Gillard is doing is because I think, it's interesting, there's 3 women sat round this table. Until women have equality in every single walk of life, we will continue to have women subjected to male abuse, male bad behaviour and essentially men's violence. And then in the world of policing, sorry, I'll shut up in a minute, I'm talking too much.
Not at all.
But in the world of policing, what you see is that sort of institutional sexism where, I couldn't get over the fact that in the Metropolitan Police, and I dare say if you looked elsewhere in the rest of the country, well, look at your own exposé of Greater Manchester Police. And I know that was a wee while ago, but essentially what you showed there was this extraordinary behaviour, criminal behaviour by police officers leaving women naked in police cells. More recently, there's been another expose by the media that showed body-worn video cameras being used on a woman and several women in ways that would beggar absolute belief. And one of them was the actual victim, not the perpetrator. Yeah. So I think this sort of sexism and misogyny runs deep into the institution of policing, where, of course, they have the power. Nobody else in society, no other institution has the power to stop me, to handcuff me, to search me, to basically strip search me, and to put me naked into a police cell tied for 24 hours. The only people that can do that are serving police officers, and that's why this matters so much.
What's it like in Australia?
Look, I think there are similar issues everywhere. I think there have been some particular issues here in the UK, in your media expose and many, many others. But if we, pull the curtain back right around the world, I think we know that gender-based violence, sexual violence is underreported. People don't do it because they fear the processes, fear the stigma. even those who do it face extraordinary delays, and it is very, very hard to see it through all the way to a conviction. So these problems are endemic everywhere. And Louise is right to say this is, you know, supported by and against a backdrop where around the world no country has achieved full gender equality, whether we measure that through economic empowerment or the number of women who are at the top in organisations and politics. There is still so much more to do, and we are very focused, and me in this stage of my life after serving as Prime Minister, very focused with the Global Institute for Women's Leadership with my colleagues at King's College London in doing everything we can to shine a light on what needs to be done, and then working with the activist community for change.
Transgender violence very much in the headlines at the moment after what we saw, what happened to Brianna. And, you know, we've been talking about our Prime Minister this morning. Politicians do need to be incredibly aware of the ramifications of their words.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, where are we at with politics? It feels to me like it's anything goes, and that people are forgetting that they are there elected by us. You know, politics is by the people, for the people. And somewhere in all of this, people have lost that, I think, and that why I want change, whether that's a different government or a new government of some kind, is I can't wait for it, Kay. And, you know, just coming back to the Metropolitan Police, for example, if a woman is raped in London, at the moment, catching the criminal and putting him, because it's normally a him, through the criminal justice system only happens in 9% of cases. That has almost halved in the last 10 to 15 years. And I think that you have that, and you just think, well, what are you all in government for? It's like, some of this is about money, yes, but some of it in the Metropolitan Police was about choices. They chose to deprioritise the specialist protection, you know, the officers that protect women, and to prioritise others. They are choices that you make. And I think that's where what happened yesterday was a very sad moment, I think, at Prime Minister's questions. And, you know, I hope people make mistakes, they need to learn from them. But boy, oh boy, apology would be the first thing I would be doing.
Yeah. Do you have a view?
Well, I'm someone who used to play it pretty hard in Australian Question Time. Australian politics is known for its robust political culture, so it's really not for me to lecture about parliamentary standards, but I do think it's kind of a golden life rule that if you've upset someone in a way that they've found very confronting, then the best thing to do is to offer the apology and seek to make a real connection with them.
Especially if they're the parents of a murdered trans child.
Absolutely. They've already faced the ultimate horror.
Who is already putting herself out there as a woman that is trying to figure out how to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, who has reached out to the parents of the perpetrators, who is modelling the behaviour that none of us should ever expect of a family whose child has been murdered in such circumstances. And so I think it's the discord again, Kay, it's the thing, I think the way you put the question to us is essentially this kind of rub, really, which is, you know, I am really quite tough. I mean, that's probably why Julia and I get along. I'm very tough on crime. I would probably lock some people up for longer. You know, don't get me wrong. But even I think that we have to have a sense of responsibility around language and kindness.
Ladies, we are out of time, I'm afraid, but it's always a pleasure to have intelligent conversations with strong, sassy women. So thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Wilfred, follow that if you can.
You should continue with your excellent, strong, sassy women, because I'm definitely going to be a letdown in comparison. But I will do my best, which is to say I think we're going to be leading the top of the show on this U-turn that we're expecting to happen today about Labour spending $28 billion, of course, to meet its green prosperity plan. Just interestingly, just crossed on the wires, Kay, is that Greenpeace have made a statement saying that this shows weak political, economic and climate leadership from Starmer before he's even got his feet under the table. I'm sure the criticism will continue. We're actually going to be talking to Barry Gardiner today. I'm looking forward to that because I have a feeling even though he's a member of the same party, he's going to be criticising his leader for this U-turn, if indeed it all comes to pass.
Just yesterday, we heard from Chris Bryant that it was definitely going to happen at some time in the life of the first term of a Labour government, I should say. Nobody told him about the memo.
Nobody told him, and let's see what the reaction is. I mean, Barry Gardiner was a former shadow energy secretary for the party. What about the current one? What about Ed Miliband? Is this a resignation potential U-turn or not? I imagine it won't be. That their party does largely show unity in a way that the Tories perhaps aren't at the moment, and they'll... Well, look, why is this U-turn happening? They're focused on the election. They're playing it safe. Will that hurt turnout if it's seen as U-turning on core principles? We shall see. By the way, also today we're going to be talking about the Pakistan elections. Polls closed there about midday our time. We'll be talking about that. And further afield, we'll also be talking about the Supreme Court in the US hearing a critical case today as it relates to the US election. We won't get the result of that yet, but they are sitting to hear whether or not Colorado can remove former President Trump from the ballot. Lots on the agenda.
Oh, I want your view quickly on that. Is it former President Trump or is it President Trump? I thought once you were president, you were always a president, but I'm always having a battle with the team about this. They say I'm nuts.
Well, I think that given that he's standing again against a sitting president, we do have to add the word former to clarify, but not that anybody isn't aware. But my take on it is you still call them Mr. President, but if you're saying President Obama or Trump or Clinton, you would say former president. But I don't know what the official rule is. Either way, whenever a prime minister goes abroad, they call him Mr. Prime Minister, sitting or past, and get that wrong.
OK, we'll see you at 10. Thanks very much. Still to come on The Breakfast Show, a piece of history is being made at sea. More on that after the break.
It's like Emirates. It's like better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back to the Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Let's talk about more strong women now, should we? Here we go. Scroll up autocue. There we go. History is currently being made as the first woman of colour crew are competing in the Ocean Globe race. Pleased to say that skipper Heather Thomas is with us. Hi, Heather, tell us more.
Yeah, hello there. Yeah, we are currently on leg 3 of the Ocean Globe race and have just passed Cape Horn, which is a momentous occasion for any sailor. On board, we have women from all over the world. I think about 8 nationalities and 3 women of colour as well. So we're really trying to show the world more diversity in sailing.
Excellent. Remind us why sailing around Cape Horn is so very difficult to do.
Yeah, so Cape Horn is quite treacherous waters. You've got the entirety of the Southern Ocean before it, so you've got quite big swells and notoriously quite strong weather systems. We were pretty lucky. We didn't see any major wind or waves, but it's certainly very, very cold on board. We don't have any moments, and so it's a big achievement for all of the crew, all of the girls on board.
Excellent, fantastic. So what happens next in this Ocean Global race that you're in?
Yeah, so now we're heading north, and our next stop is Punta del Este in Uruguay. And then after that, it's the last leg of the races from Punta del Este back to the UK, to Southampton. So, and then, yeah, it's all over, I guess. We've already sailed from Southampton to Cape Town, and then Cape Town to Auckland. We sailed from Auckland about, I think, 4 weeks ago. But yeah.
I think I'm right in saying it's an 8-month race in total. You're the first women of colour to do this. Why do you think that is?
Sorry, say again. The line's not very good.
No problem at all. I was saying first women of colour to actually take part in this race in this way. Why do you think that is?
I think, unfortunately, sailing is seen as a little bit of an elitist sport, and it's a very white, male-dominated sport, and I think that's the barriers that we're trying to break with Made It. I'd love to introduce you to Vui, one of our young female sailors on board.
Okay, that'd be great.
Who can tell you a little bit about her story. She's from South Africa, and she is on the boat for the entire of the race. So I'll pass you over to her now.
Fantastic, thank you. We only have a limited amount of time for you, so do tell me about the journey, what it's like for you.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you a bit.
Oh, that's good, that's good. I was just asking you to tell me a little bit about the journey.
Can you please say that again?
Yeah, I knew this was going to happen. Can you tell me a little bit about the journey for you? Is the answer. You know what we're going to do? We're going to leave that there. They've got quite a lot more still to do on this journey, so I'm sure that we will touch base with them again before they finish the race. It's an 8-month race, and they've just rounded Cape Horn. Amazing. Some breaking news with Deborah from the Russia Supreme Court.
Well, it's from the Election Commission. They've so it's this opposition candidate who has been wanting to run in the presidential election in Russia against Vladimir Putin, Boris Nadezhdin, and he's just said that the Electoral Commission has barred him from running, and he is going to be appealing this decision to the Supreme Court. And I can read a quote that he's just given, if that's okay. He says that the Central Election Commission refuses to register my candidacy for the post of President of the Russian Federation. I do not agree with the decision. I collected more than 200,000 signatures throughout Russia. We conducted the collection openly and honestly. Participating in the presidential elections in 2024 is the most important political decision of my life. I do not retreat from my intentions. I will appeal the decision of the Central Election Commission to the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation. So he is vowing to fight on, but it does seem that this attempt is doomed, and then that means that Vladimir Putin will be standing as a candidate of one for the Russian people when they go to vote in March. So
who'd have thought it, eh?
What a surprise.
Yeah, OK. I wonder who's going to win. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's have a quick look at the weather.